need one more, don't we?
What, Dave, yes, but I just want to know if it started yet. Pardon? Good evening, everyone. We're starting just a bit late because we had a little trouble out at the front entrance having security there. Tonight, this is the City Council study session, Monday, March 25th. And tonight, Councilmember Sierra, who let us know he was going to be gone, is not here, as well as Councilmember Wink has trouble with some flight, so she will not be here as well. So we still have a quorum, and we'll take it as it comes through the different agenda items. First one up is City Center update. Redevelopment Manager Dan Poremba is here to present to discuss the development request for qualifications, the RFQ for the city property. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem, City Council members. This item is just a recommendation to, as quickly as possible, issue a developer request for qualifications pertaining to the city property within Inglewood City Center, and we've referred to the city property as that which is either owned or controlled by the city and or EAF. And just by reference, you have this attached to your memo, but the city property is a blue-colored property. It's about 10.6 developable acres. The red property is the C3 property, which is about 11.8 developable acres. You'll remember this is the property that was foreclosed on by the special servicer C3. It's really the former Weingarten property that was developed and operated by Weingarten Realty for many years. C3 is actively marketing the property, the C3 property, through their broker, CBRE. That marketing began on March 4th. They are expecting an offer deadline coming up very quickly on April 9th. They've received over 200 expressions of interest and 120 signed confidentiality agreements. Due to the Weingarten foreclosure and the strong national interest of real estate developers and employers in Metro Denver area TOD locations, we really have a timely and exciting opportunity to encourage the coordinated redevelopment of both the C3 property and the city property. As we've talked about on numerous prior occasions, the coordinated planning and redevelopment would significantly improve City Center's mix of uses, level of activity, walkability, financial sustainability, market values, and city revenues. Our strategy has been really to protect Inglewood's interests by doing everything that we can possibly do to try to tip the scales and influence the buyer pool for the C3 property, as well as the ultimate outcome of who that buyer is. Our goal has really been to avoid a status quo buyer who has no intention of improving the property within the near term. We have tried to collaborate in a number of ways with C3 Asset Management. Unfortunately, because of who they are as a special servicer who foreclosed on the property, they really have no motivation to collaborate with the city, and that's really unfortunate, but it does go to this evening's recommendation about the RFQ. We've nurtured a number of developer prospects that have approached the city directly, again, to try to make sure and protect the city's interests somewhat separately from the C3 property interests. You've recently received letters of introduction and interest from those three parties. Based on the February 11th council study session, we drafted a detailed letter to CBRE and C3 explaining the ground lease amendments that the council would consider to facilitate redevelopment of the C3 property. We also made it very clear to them that consideration would be expected by the city in return for any accommodations. So we've done the best we can to really influence the audience of potential buyers. We've previously discussed one of the best levers, perhaps the best lever that we as the city have to influence the buyer outcome is to put into motion the council's consideration of possible redevelopment of the city property. That's the property in blue to the west of the C3 property in possible tandem with the C3 property. And we previously discussed two tools. We talked about creating an unsolicited proposal policy and ordinance. We also specifically talked about a developer request for proposals. And we had started on both of those, but we were not actually anticipating that the C3 marketing timeline would be as quick and as accelerated as it has been. So based on discussions and evaluation of options with the city attorney as well as with our new outside counsel on these matters, we are now recommending the issuance of a more general request for qualifications, which, subject to your consent, can be issued this week, and we can, as a city, then be in a position to better safeguard the city's interests in future conversations with C3 and their buyers. So you have a working draft of the RFQ that's attached to your council memo. We've continued to expand and refine this. I think it's important to emphasize that all RFQ responses would be non-binding on the city and city council, and council will have the flexibility to reject all submittals received. So this RFQ is largely to just protect the city's interests and make sure that we maximize our opportunity to negotiate with both C3 and their buyer. The RFQ has a very short response period, again, timed to be largely in tandem with the C3 marketing. The current targeted submittal date for the city RFQ would be April 12th. I think we've outlined this in the memo, but the next step following the RFQ will be really determined by the number and quality of RFQ responses received, whether the short list of C3 property buyers respond to the city RFQ, the quality and experience of developers submitting responses, and some further legal research. I think it's fair to say after all of that, a second stage developer request for proposals is very possible, is actually likely. I think just a comment on expectations for all of us. I think, as you're aware, most top developers have a lot on their plates right now. So it's very possible that we might not receive very much interest because we would actually be asking developers to jump through quite a few hoops in a very short period of time. So I think the possible backup plan for this is the idea of potentially issuing a more detailed RFQ or RFP late in the year. However, I think, again, to maintain our leverage with C3 and their buyers, it's really important that we, the city, issue an RFQ at this point. And I think we will then, in tandem with that, try to influence the process as best as we can through our responses to their due diligence questions and their expected questions about lease extension and amendment. The issuance of the developer RFQ does not result in any current expenses or costs or financial obligations for the city. So, subject to council's consent, our recommendation is really that we just issue the RFQ as quickly as possible and get that into play, again, to protect the city's interests as it relates to the C3 marketing campaign. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Council, hope that you're all ready to weigh in a bit on this tonight. Anyone want to kick us off? Councilmember Cuesta.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Poremba. I appreciate the presentation. I'm hoping I can get a better understanding of the timeline. CBRE is representing C3, right? And they're listing the property.
Correct.
That was placed on the market March 5th?
March 4th, Monday.
March 4th, excuse me. And as far as your understanding, the period by which somebody can submit an offer for the property is April 9th.
Correct.
I've got that, as you probably know, that is a couple weeks away at this point.
Right.
And you're mentioning the RFQ or the RFP, and that would be released on April 12th?
Our plan would be, with council's consent, to actually issue the developer RFQ this week. We think we could issue it in the next couple of days, then ask developers to respond to that with their submittal of qualifications being by the 12th of April. So that would coincide fairly closely with the target date that C3, actually their broker, has established to receive their offers. And the main thing is, the main purpose of the RFQ is to just really inform the marketplace about the city's desires for the development, both of the C3 property and the city property. It's mostly, in simple terms, to tell the market that the city wants to see some kind of corrective action and redevelopment take place on the C3 property, and that the city in general is going to do what it can to facilitate that type of future for that property. It's really an opportunity to let the marketplace know that the city does not generally favor the idea of a status quo only scenario, with somebody buying just to receive the balance of the rents in place with no intention to invest in the property or reposition it anytime in the near future. So at the end of the day, the RFQ is just an opportunity to tell that story to the marketplace.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
In terms of that offer process, it closes April 9th. Do they just go to the highest bidder at that point? Do you know how that typically goes?
That's exactly what we're trying to avoid. We really want to make sure that we have an opportunity to have dialogue with C3 about the way that they select that ultimate buyer, and that we have an opportunity to have discussion with their short list of buyers about all these types of objectives that the city has for the property. So our hope is that they don't just select the highest buyer. There's really a qualitative evaluation of those buyers, those short list of candidates, and that they allow us, the city, to participate in that evaluation.
And up to this point, how has the conversation been with C3? Have we been involved? Do you feel like there's an open dialogue? Will we have a seat at the table when that time comes?
I think doing things like the RFQ, following I think it was the February 11th study session with council, we drafted a very detailed letter to C3 telling them what council would generally be willing to consider in terms of amendments and extensions to the ground lease. Unfortunately, just partially in answer to your question, the understanding was that they would include that letter in their offering materials about the property. They did not. And we let them know that we were very disappointed about that. And their current position to us is that when they get to the short list of candidates, they will then reveal that information to them and allow us to have conversations with them about the ground lease. So, to answer your question, they've not been as cooperative and really collaborative as we would have wanted, and so that's why it's really important, I think, that we take every proactive opportunity we have to tell the market directly about what the city's goals for that property and potentially the adjacent city property could be over time.
Understood. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mayor.
Councilmember Barentine.
For transparency's sake, could you please name the 3 developers that you've been working with so far?
I believe the letters that you received were from SKB, Lincoln Property, and Kentro Group.
Do you believe that this quick timeline for this on April 12th would give anybody outside of the groups that you've been speaking to already an opportunity to really be able to present and participate in this?
I think so. I mean, I think the fact that CBRE has received 120 signed confidentiality agreements shows that there's a significant amount of interest out in the marketplace. I think what CBRE is planning to do is when their proposals are received by the 9th, then they would allow 30 days of due diligence for the finalists that they would pick. So I guess I apologize. The answer to your question is because it's such a short time period for all respondents and all interested parties, they really are, by definition, put on a pretty even playing field. Typically, an investment like this would allow prospects several months to actually try to understand the property, make an offer, and then usually 60 or 90 days of due diligence at least. Whereas in this case, CBRE is generally planning to make 30 days of due diligence available to a short list of buyers. So it's a very, very quick time frame. And what they're really telling the marketplace is any interested buyer is going to have to take on a very high level of risk at the end of the day by the time they close.
Given that your conversations with these three, are you still preferring that one of these three go ahead and take this over?
I don't think we have any preferences. I think really it was that we were responding to three qualified developers who had shown a strong interest in not only the C3 property, but combining it potentially with the city property. All three seem to have an understanding of the complexity that they would have to go through as they and the city council work through what a redevelopment relationship would look like going forward. And all three seem to have a high level of understanding about the level of outreach that council would expect going forward. So I think, and they present a range of different types of developers to council, but I don't think we have a particularly strong preference for any of those.
Have these three also presented to CBRE?
They've been, all three of them have been in touch, in communication with CBRE, yeah, and all three of them as a kind of as the minimum threshold we expected to submit financial offers by that April 9th date. Okay.
Councilmember Martinez.
Thank you. I know this timeline is moving really rapidly, so thanks for keeping us posted as it goes quickly. So by issuing this RFQ, we're kind of really showing that we really want to stay involved and a part of this conversation, right? That's kind of one of the main purposes for doing it. So I guess that assumes if we don't do this, it could be a signal that we are okay to sit it out. Would you say that's accurate?
I think so. And I think really the RFQ in a way is a substitute for the letter that we had worked out, that we had drafted after that particular study session where we talked about possibilities for lease amendment and extension. And we, as I said, were actually really quite disappointed that they had not incorporated that in their offering materials.
Okay. And then do you think there's any chance that C3 would close before our RFQ deadline of the 12th?
No.
Not really? No.
No.
Okay.
Their basic plan is to make a short period of due diligence available to their final contract buyer. And the thing we don't know at this point, we'd like to see a short list of buyers that the city has an opportunity to talk to more than one buyer. And we just don't know from CBRE whether we're going to have that opportunity or whether they would go to one finalist. after they receive those offers.
Okay, and so in our ideal scenario, we would get the RFQs, and then there may be some groups in common, and then
Yes.
we would ideally be able to have some seat at that table to discuss. That's our ideal kind of scenario at this point.
Yes,
Okay.
I think that's well said. The ideal for the city is to see some overlap between their offers and those developers who respond to the city RFQ.
Okay, thank you. Just want to make sure I got that clear.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Mayor Pro Tem Russell.
So one of our goals in putting out the RFQ is to attract some of the developers that are interested in the property, the C3 properties.
Yeah, I would say that's right. We really, as a first step, want to expand the pool of interested developers by telling them that there's a bigger opportunity here. One, that it could involve redevelopment of the C3 property, and that the city is open to looking at how that would work. And that two, it could involve in tandem a possible redevelopment of the city property next door.
So is CBRE listing the entire property, or they're parceling it out?
No, good question. They just have a listing from C3 on the red parcel.
Okay. I think that's it for now. Thank you.
Councilmember Barentine.
What would be the downside? I mean, we're in the process of hiring a new city manager, and this is going to be a big project for that new person. And the council might benefit from the insight or experience from somebody new coming into the community. What would be the downside waiting a couple of months to go ahead and make sure that we have that insight, that oversight?
I think certainly in a perfect world, we'd all like to have this new city manager on board before any of these decisions were to be made. I think the reality is this is moving quick enough because of the C3 timeline that I don't think we have that luxury. I mean, I think the reality is they're in a big rush to pick the new owner of the C3 property, and it looks to me, I'm obviously not up to speed on all of it, that's likely to happen before the city manager is on board.
But the property that we have that we actually don't have full control over yet or ownership of is separate from what C3 is doing, and so we actually could wait for the piece that we're doing. So for the piece that we're doing, since we really have somewhat limited control over C3, why would it hurt for us to go ahead and wait for the property that we anticipate in a couple of years that we're going to have full control over and it'll be paid?
I think the ability to talk about the potential of the city property, the blue property, is one of the things that starts to tip the scales in terms of who the buyer pool is for the C3 property. And so it starts to influence the outcome and our ability to influence the outcome, because it starts telling the marketplace that there's a bigger redevelopment opportunity here, and that it's not just a status quo acquisition of a basically fading retail asset. So I think even if the blue property doesn't get involved and there is no overlap of the two properties, telling the marketplace that there's a willingness on behalf of city council to consider that and look at what the opportunities are right now is a positive that lets you, the council, influence who the potential buyers for the C3 property is, even if then you elect to not do anything with the city property in conjunction with that. It puts it in play, and by doing so, then it communicates a slightly different message to the marketplace.
Thank you for the work that you've done in this. This looks like it's going extremely fast, and we know it's a hot market for this kind of thing. The big side of this is being able to offer this bigger piece to everybody. What Councilmember Barentine is talking about certainly could happen if that falls through as well. So we're not limited from having them be separated in the future as well, just opening up the pool in a different way. I'd be very much in favor of seeing us push forward on this. You're going to still be here. Our community development staff are not changing. you'd be the ones who would have to shepherd this through, even with the brand-new manager at this point. So I'd like to make sure we get all the opportunities there. Could very well be that they won't include this letter again in these last round, and they don't want to, sort of play with us on it. And if that's the case, there's no loss on our part, except for the time that you've all put in, which has been immense. So I appreciate it.
I think we have had encouraging progress working with our new outside counsel. They, by now, have been reviewing a lot of the related documents, and so we have had proactive discussions about things that we can do legally to try to gain some additional leverage with C3 and their buyer. So even though they're on a very rapid schedule, we have some feeling that there are some other tools that ultimately the city has at their disposal to potentially slow things down a little bit. We can't, put a lot of weight on those, but I think we know what our options are a little bit more. And as things go along, I think we have a little bit more leverage to influence the final decision with C3.
Do you have any indication for why they haven't really wanted to have us included at this point?
It's kind of a long answer. I would say that under these commercial mortgage-backed security type loans, they have these special servicers who are in place to basically safeguard the loan on behalf of the trustees who provide the capital for the debt. The flip side of that is they have no legal right to modify the collateral. So C3 actually doesn't have a right to, on their own, enter into any negotiations that pertain to the ground lease, or because that would be a moderation, that would be a modification of the collateral. So it's just outside of their normal scope of operation, and so they're really trying to get it into the buyer's hands as quickly as possible. So, and that would be the one that the city and city council would ultimately have negotiations with regarding the ground lease.
Thank you. Councilmember Martinez.
Thank you. I think issuing the RFQ is really low risk at this point. It's non-binding. We don't have to make any decisions on it right now. So I'm in favor of moving forward with the RFQ. I'd be supportive.
Mayor Pro Tem Russell.
Is the C3 property as well as the city property involved in the opportunity zone?
Yes. Both of them are in the opportunity zone, and that is a good point. The opportunity zone is attracting, I think, a lot of capital interest. There is a decreasing time period that really works in, and I think several of these developers, and we'll see more, have the intention of using the funding that's available because of the opportunity zone program.
Okay, so that could be why there's a lot of interest right now, is because of the opportunity zone.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Berentine.
So are you saying that this opportunity zone that includes our properties, that CBRE or C3 are marketing them as well? Are CBRE or C3 marketing our properties as well?
No.
Because when you keep referring to this opportunity zone, so they're not marketing those properties, and the 140 that have come forward, or 200 or 120, we're not told that those properties were part of any deal that they would make.
No.
Thank you.
Perhaps you could, I'm not sure if you can do this quickly, can you explain the opportunity zone so that others would realize that our property isn't on this yet? Because I think it could get really confusing.
The opportunity zone was part of the 2017 Tax Act, and what it attempts to do is take capital gains that investors may have and create an avenue for those to be invested either in new real estate opportunities or, and this is lost a lot of the time, business opportunities within those opportunity zones. So it allows investors, let's say, who have a lot of capital gains from their investment in the stock market, for example, but no place to put that. All of a sudden, there's a new place for them to invest, and they can invest, for example, in real estate within Inglewood that's in the opportunity zone, and they get a deferral of their capital gains. They get a 10 to 15% reduction of their capital gains. And what it does is it entices them to put their capital to work in a location like Inglewood. So for developers who, of course, are always looking for new capital sources, it gives them a brand new source of capital in the marketplace.
Thank you. Folks want to weigh in? I already have. Who else? Councilmember Cuesta.
Thank you. I do still like the idea of having a singular owner for both properties, a singular vision, one that pays both dividends for the buyer and then the citizens. And I know that that could be difficult to get to. It feels like the ship is sailing a little bit. April 9th is very, very close. One of my biggest concerns is just status quo. It goes to the highest bidder and pretty much things remain the same. And then we have, somewhat of, I wouldn't say revolving door of tenant, but not as many as we'd like and not the solidarity we would like in the continuity. So I certainly would move forward with the RFQ and see what we can do to keep this alive and still move towards that singular vision that works well for both the buyer and the citizens. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take that as a
Please
go
support
ahead.
the
Let's
RFQ.
move forward on it. Mayor Pro Tem, Councilmember Barentine.
I really think that our properties are separate. We're not even in control of them. They're not paid off yet. And we haven't even established the difference between whether it's a 501c3 or what the status is, even if EAF has changed every time we've discussed it. And I'm very concerned about doing this prior to a city manager coming in when I believe a few months is not going to cause a problem for it. I think that we're trying to kind of garner some people that, and have conversations with people, and then they end up having an in because this is such a short time frame that it's going to exclude, including some more players in this. And I'm concerned. Some of the ones that we've already talked with have already done projects here, and I'm concerned that we're not reaching out a little bit more. So I'm not interested in doing this at this time.
Councilmember Martinez, I sort of took yours as a yes, but I might be
Yes,
wrong.
I said I'm in favor.
Yes, okay. Mayor Pro Tem.
I'm not necessarily interested in moving forward at this time either. I do have some other things that I'm concerned about, and one of those things is who is representing City Council's interest. We know that the city staff and EAF are being taken care of. So that is just another concern that I have right now. I don't think it's always wise to get in a rush just because there's an opportunity. I think when you start making decisions in a hurry, that there is more room for error. So I'm not interested in moving forward at this time.
City Attorney, we have 3 people in consensus here out of 5. Is that enough to just go forward with that and encourage the next steps, or?
Yes, because you're not making any kind of final decision. An RFQ is requesting qualifications for people who might be interested. Any responses to the RFQ would come back to the City Council for actual review.
All right, thank you. Hopefully that gives you enough to go on and take your next steps then.
We'll be back with the results and recommend the next steps.
Thank you. Next up is our agenda item 2, 2020. Whoever thought we'd get to 2020? Budget kickoff. Finance and Administrative Services Director Maria Sobota is here to present.
Good evening. I'm going to ask Sam to help with the presentation.
That's good. So we're keeping her at the podium because it's her video footage of her. So,
And I'll be turning
She
my
looks-
head a lot. And speaking of 2020, I can't believe my daughter's graduating in 2020.
yeah.
Time has flown. Okay. So good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, and City Council. Today is our official 2020 budget kickoff, where I will present preliminary revenue and expenditure forecasts. The one thing that I will say, I'll be going through a lot of information, and as we move through the budgeting cycle, I guarantee you will see these slides again. So it's information that is repeatable. throughout the process as reminders. I think the next time, we talk about capital, and we're going to be working towards a workshop in May, a lot of this information will be brought forth again. So this is a preliminary look at what we're thinking in starting to get our teams together and figuring out how we're going to proceed with the 2020 budget. So tonight, as I mentioned, we're going to review our preliminary 2020 revenue and expenditure assumptions. We're going to seek input on the 2020 budget operating and capital guidelines, but again, we'll have more conversations as we progress through the more detailed budgeting processes and discussions that we'll have with you, but we at least have some high-level assumptions that we'd like to share with you. And then I think a big part of this discussion tonight is talking about options for alternative financing plans for addressing our capital needs within the city. These are just proposals with some relative impact. And I do want to mention, and I'll say this again when we're at that point, that the assumptions that are included in the back related to the alternative financing options are just estimates at this point. The interest rates aren't correct. I mean, not that they're not correct, they're just assumptions at this point and examples for relative size. So I want to emphasize that. Okay. So we had presented a couple of weeks ago, actually it's February, time is flying, a 2020 budget preview, and in that we included a city council budget calendar. So I wanted to put this back up there and say that we completed that budget preview and we promised to come back with the assumptions. So we are in the first quarter and we circled the box of where we're at today. Okay. I went too fast. Oops. Go back. Okay. So fiscal health. Of course, whenever you're looking at an organization, the city's fiscal health and wellness is an important concept so that we can monitor, our ongoing fiscal health. And it's important that we keep this in our sights as we begin to develop, our 2020 budget and look at our 2019 appropriation and how we spend that going forward. And really we're doing that. We're talking about our financial health every month when I review the financials. And obviously how we're doing in 2019 will carry forward into 2020. As part of our fiscal health, of course, we want to spend within our means. And of course, this concept I think we talk about quite frequently as it relates not only to the city's budget, but also our personal finances. And certainly, we practice this within our city's daily operations and budget process. Another key component of fiscal health, of course, is establishing and maintaining reserves. And so that's also an area that we review every month when we're looking at our financials. We're talking about those balances and talking about our policies around the reserve. And of course, I mention this every month that our general fund reserve policy is 16% of revenues that reserves approximately 2 months of operations. It's also important that we continue to monitor any variances that we have, budget versus actual, in the current year. Because obviously as we head into the new fiscal year, we need to know what our beginning fiscal or ending year balance will be that will establish the foundation for the beginning of the subsequent year. So we talk about spending on projects that might be delayed or what have you as it relates to going forward into the next year. And also any variances to budget versus actual as it relates to operating expenses. It's also important to remember that we are transparent about the true cost of doing business. So understanding the cost of what a program or service costs helps us to identify how we may fund the program or services with different types of fees or taxes. And so as we move forward through the budgeting process, certainly that's going to be part of the dialogue, particularly when we meet in May for the workshop that we have scheduled. Each of the department directors will talk about whether or not there are fees related to any of the budgetary needs that they have going forward. And then, of course, incorporating economic analysis and long-term planning into decision-making. And a good portion of the information that we gathered prior to tonight's presentation regarding what's going on in the world around us related to economics certainly plays a part in the assumptions that we move forward with in the budget. So when we met last month, or I guess last week actually, we talked about the preliminary 2018 estimated year-end fund balance of $19.7 million. There was a $9.6 million fund balance available above policy at the end of 2018. Our revenues that were budgeted were $49.5 million. Our budgeted expenditures, $49.6 million. And there was a net transfer out from the fund balance of $3.0 million. So that encompassed a $3.1 million transfer that the council approved in the budget, and then a transfer in for the debt service. So our 2019 estimated year-end fund balance of $16.6 million, if everything remained as we had budgeted, which we know that it will not, these are estimates, we would have a $6.6 million fund balance available above policy plus the Tabor Reserve. This does not include higher forecasted 2019 revenues, and if you have had an opportunity to read through the package, you can see that we are estimating that our 2019 revenues will exceed the budgeted revenue of $49.5 million, and we're going to talk about that tonight. Okay. So we reviewed the components of our revenue, and when we met and we discussed preliminary budget in February, but as a 5-year average percent of total revenue, we thought it would be good to just repetition is good to know what pieces and parts we're looking at. So these are the components of our revenue, and these are percentages that represent a 5-year average percent of the total. So property tax, 7.3%. Sales and use taxes, by and large, the largest part of our revenues, 59.3%. Franchise fees, 7.4%. License permits, 3.6%. Intergovernmental revenue, 4%. Charges for services, 6.3%. Recreation program fees, 5.4%. Contribution from component units, 2.2%. And all of other revenue that's specified over to the right equates to 4.5% of our total revenue. So this is probably one of the most important slides in the package, in my opinion, our revenue history and forecast. So economists are estimating that the national economy in the near term will grow at lower rates than what was experienced in this past recovery period. The Federal Reserve Board announced on May 20th that they do not plan to raise interest rates in the near future as the national economy is growing at a slower rate. The GDP growth rate was revised downward from 2.3% to 2.1%. It's important to note, this information can change, and so as we go through the budgeting cycle, if this information changes, we'll let you know, because it does provide us with our foundation to build not only our revenue, but also our expenditure forecasts as we move forward. On average, Englewood has experienced a 4.8% growth during 2015 through 2018 as compared to the state with a 5.3% average growth rate during the same period. We anticipate increasing the 2019 budget sales and use tax revenue estimate by approximately 6%. And this is identified in the box that's identified, circled in red. You can see the number that I mentioned before, the 2019 budget, $29.9 million. We're expecting to actually receive an additional amount of revenue in sales and use tax. And the primary reason for that is because when we're building the budget at this time of year, and so in 2019, we were building the budget in mid-2018, it included a low estimate for the collection of retail marijuana and sales tax. And also, as we discussed last week when we were reviewing the financials, the impact of the Supreme Court ruling on the South Dakota versus Wayfair ruling on online retail's presence in states where they have customers also contributes to an additional sales and use tax that we didn't identify in 2018 when we were originally putting together the budget. You'll see the property tax is approximately the same in 2019 estimate versus 2019 budget. However, for the 2020 forecast, we are including approximately a 1.5% increase. But again, that is based on a biannual Arapahoe County property appraisals, and there's a possibility that that could change through the budgeting process. So we have to stay in tune with what that's going to look like for 2020. And then all other revenue sources, we expect those to stay the same to our estimate that we had previously for 2019, but we expect them to increase by approximately 2% in 2020 through 2024. So for our expenditures, again, this is a similar representation of the 5-year average percent of general fund expenditures. The city manager's office accounts for approximately 5% of our total expenditures. The fire services contract, 13%. Finance, 4.4%. Information technology, 3.7%. Community development, 4.2%. Public works, 13.3%. Police, 30%. Parks, rec, and library service, 15.9%. Debt service, approximately 4%, and all other expenditures, 6.5%. And those pieces are identified in the lower left-hand box of this slide. This gives you an idea of our fund expenditures over multiple years. You can see our estimates include a 3% increase annually from 2020 to 2024, leveling off somewhat between 2023 and 24 because we are going to pay off the certificate of participation bonds, reducing expenditures by approximately 1.5 in the general fund starting in 2024. You can see we didn't change the estimate from the budget just yet on our estimates. As we progress through the year, that may change just slightly for 2019. I wanted to walk through the different fund balances. We'll not only talk about the general fund balance, but then we'll also talk about the other funds as well. This is a slide that I believe we are all very familiar with. Again, the 2019 estimate does include the 6% higher sales and use tax over the 2019 budget. You can see the different components, the Tabor Reserve of $1.8 million. Then moving upward into the yellow boxes, you can see the long-term asset reserve of approximately $4.9 million. The unassigned fund balance in this current year, $12.9 million, for a total fund balance of approximately the $19.7 million that I had mentioned before. So our general fund summary, proposed 2020 budget forecast assumptions. As I had mentioned, for 2020 revenue sources, sales and use tax revenue up 3%, property tax revenue 1.5%, all other revenue sources up 2%, and 2020 expenditure uses up 3%. The one thing that I will mention as it relates to expenditures, we're going to be working with each of the departments over the next several months to look at specific line item budgets and talk with them about how their budgets going forward into 2020 support the overall goals that council has, and we'll be back with you April 8th talking about the community goals that you established last May, and kind of circling back to say if we talk with our department directors about those goals and how their budgets are built up to support this, are we on the right track? So although it says expenditure uses of 3%, I would expect that there could be a range within the departments depending upon how they're supporting the overall goals. It's not that we're going to go in and say, okay, everybody just add 3% to your budget. We need to look at individual personnel. We need to look at programs that they're working on. But this is just a general guideline that we'll be working with based on where the economy kind of shows us it should be, just based for general expenditures. So I wanted to talk about some of the other funds that we have as well. We reviewed what the components were and what the sources and uses were for these funds when we met in February. And we'll talk a little bit about where we think the estimated year-end fund balances will be. So you're going to see at the bottom of the slide, no significant changes in fund balances in several of these. So for special funds, again, in 2018, here are the components that make up our special revenue funds in millions and their estimated balances. You can see when you look at our estimated 2019 ending balance, they really haven't changed very much. So as they move into the next fiscal year, the balance will be very similar to what it was in 2018. Debt service funds, again, hardly any change from 2018 to 2019. Those are the components of the debt service funds. Our internal service funds, estimated funds available in millions, and those are the components as we talked about them when we met in February. Again, no significant funds changes in the available balance from 2018 to 19. Our enterprise funds. Here are the components. There are going to be changes in the fund balance based on the operating expenditures in this year. You can see the water fund from 14.6 million to 13.1, the sewer fund from 6.1 to 1.7, and so forth. Those are the two major changes in the enterprise funds. And not different than what was presented in the budget, but I wanted to give you an update on that. So we kept that in mind. So our capital project funds, let me just catch up here in my notes. We're actually going to spend a little bit of time talking about capital, so I wanted to show you the numbers. So the capital projects funds are comprised of three primary funds: the Public Improvement Fund, the Capital Projects Fund, and the Police Building Construction Fund. As you know, a significant amount of work is being done on the building this year, so we expect that the fund balance at the end of the year would be zero in the Police Building Construction Fund, so I'll start with that. The Public Improvement Fund, the balance of 7.1 million, there'll be estimated sources of 4.2 million, which I'll talk to you about the components of that. The estimated uses of approximately 4.1 million. So the balance in the Public Improvement Fund, or the PIF as we call it, stays almost constant. It goes up just a tad because the uses are slightly less than our estimated sources. Our Capital Project Fund includes the transfer in that I had talked about before that you had voted on during the budget process. So the source of 3.1 million with estimated use of 3.1 million leaves the balance again somewhat consistent with where it was at the end of this year. So the 10.8 million combined fund balance, approximately 3.6 million unappropriated fund balance is a one-time funding source that is available for project contingencies and funding future capital projects. And also the 7.2 million that you see there is designated to complete projects in progress. So that's a look at our capital project funds. I want to talk about what the sources are. So for the Public Improvement Fund, the Public Improvement Fund generates approximately 4 million from the following sources: the vehicle use tax, the building use tax, Arapahoe County road and bridge tax, and transfers in from the general fund depending on available fund, and the Capital Projects Fund receives transfers in from the general fund depending on available funds. So as we work through the budget, and we're talking about capital projects, these are the funds that are currently available to us for us to use, unless if we determine that we are going to transfer in money from the general fund, for example, to augment funding within the capital projects funds for revenue that is currently available to use. So this is a breakdown of the capital projects funds by each of the items that I just mentioned that are the components of available revenue. The vehicle use tax, you can see the relative size that we've received over the past several years. The building use tax, the Arapahoe County Road and Bridge Tax, and the net transfer in. This is also another way to look at it as it relates to our estimated capital projects list. So you can see what our forecast is in approximate spend over the next 5 years. However, we are just in the process as a group, as a city, to determine what our capital needs are, and we plan to come back on April 22nd during a study session to talk with you and talk about the way that we might fund these additional projects. And I did mention alternative financing options for capital projects in excess of current funding levels, and this is what I want to talk about next. So there are multiple alternative financing options that can be considered. There's a general fund unassigned fund balance and the long-term asset reserve, and we talked about what that balance currently is. And certainly that is something that the council can decide as we go through the process without a vote. However, the last three options do require a ballot issue. They include the Public Improvement Fund levy as provided in charter, debt financing, or a dedicated sales tax rate. So we have talked about the general fund unassigned fund balance and LTAR, or long-term asset reserve. So we dedicate annually the amount in excess of the reserve policy plus the table reserve from the unassigned fund balance and LTAR to fund identified capital projects. And according to the estimate below, the general fund could transfer in 2020 to capital project funds up to approximately $6.6 million. That is based on current estimates. This does not include the additional sales and use tax revenue that I had mentioned before. Okay? And we'll know more about the trends as we go forward through 2019, and that's why I'm saying a lot of these are estimates. They're fluid because obviously as we have business transactions, this number could change. And this is just a even a suggestion. It's just an option should you choose to apply the $6.6 million to the capital needs that are presented to you later in April. Again, this is just an example, dedicated public improvement fund levy. So the council may levy annually a tax of not more than 2 mills to be assessed upon the valuation within the city at the same time as the regular annual taxes for the city expenses for the benefit of the fund known as the Public Improvement Fund, or the PIF. Again, these numbers can change. The assessed valuation could change, so the residential and non-residential property owner cost could also change per mill. It's just we wanted to show an example for relative size, but if we got to a point after talking about the capital projects where we thought that this was an option that we wanted to consider, we would certainly scrub those numbers and come back and talk to you a little bit more about what the property owner cost and non-residential property owner cost would be. What we've talked about as a staff over the last several days as we looked at this presentation is that there are so many considerations and variables in making these considerations. We have to take a holistic approach through the budgeting cycle and talk about decisions that are being made that maybe aren't necessarily related to capital expenditures that would play a part in any decision we would maybe go forth with to ask the public to consider in a ballot question. So I just want to be clear that this is just one of many options, but as we're putting together the proposals, as we go through the plan, we are going to try to think of it more holistically. Like, you just can't make the decision based on this without understanding how a citizen's pocketbook is going to be impacted by something else. So that's the approach that we're going to take as we move forward through the budgeting process. Okay, I had talked about DEN financing. This is also another consideration. And again, you can see the estimated interest rates, again, example only. Those are probably a little high to what we would be able to secure today, but it would say that if we would go forth to finance some of our capital needs with bonds. You can see for a 10, 20, $30 million bond issuance at those estimated interest rates, how they would impact an annual tax, or how they would impact a citizen based on annual tax on a resident property worth $400,000 or a non-resident property worth $400,000. This is just an option. And it also demonstrates the estimated annual service associated with that. Again, if this is an option that we'd want to consider, we would certainly scrub these numbers. These are just for relative size of scale and impact as we move forward in the discussion. And one thing that we should also think about as we're going through the process and we're thinking about perhaps financing as an alternative, we have certificate of participation bonds that are paid off in 2023, which would reduce our general fund expenditures by approximately $1.5 million in 2024. We also have Recreation Go bonds that are paid off in 2023. These are debt service funds that are financed through property tax. We could discuss perhaps continuing this $1.1 million debt service and issuing new debt for the identified capital. So it's a replacement of debt for other projects. We also, of course, this is much further out, but still a consideration when you're looking at what the debt service will be over, multiple years into 20, 30 years. The police headquarters building Go bonds are paid off in 2036, and these are financed through property tax. And you could consider the opportunity to continue the debt service at that time for identified capital. So any of these alternatives that we presented would have to be presented back to you with our total request and then look at over the years what it would be, right? It's not just a next year 2020 impact, it's a multiple decade sort of analysis that we would have to provide to you and plan to provide to you as we go through the budgeting process. Another alternative financing option would be to increase the sales tax rate. This scenario shows what amount of tax could be generated with 8.1%, 1%, and 10% increase based on the budgeted 2019 sales and use tax revenue estimate of $29.9 million. So you can see that a sales and use tax increase of 10% from 3.5 to 3.85 could generate approximately $2.9 or close to $3 million in estimated tax revenue. So as I've mentioned a few of these dates as we've gone through it, our next step is to come back April 8th and talk more about our vision and look at the goals that were established that last May. And April 19th, we will be providing Planning and Zoning Commission a list of the recommended capital projects for 2020 to review. On April 22nd, we will be coming back to a study session to review capital and possible alternative financing project requests. And as I mentioned, on May 11th, City Council and our department directors will participate in a workshop to discuss the following for each department. Each department director will give a presentation and talk about the priorities and initiatives for their specific departments. They'll also talk about operational requests they may have, including personnel or FTE changes, program or service level changes, and any rate or fee changes. And this was a promise that we had made to you when we presented the fee and rate schedule to you earlier this fiscal year for review, that we would incorporate that into budget discussions going forward. So they are thinking about that as they prepare their budgets. And then also we'll talk a little bit more in detail about capital requests after having the review on April 22nd. So with that, I will open it up for questions.
I could ask a question of clarification. Tonight you want, this is very informational, but you also want direction in what form, in what way?
I guess I would just like to, thank you for the question. I would like to ask if we can move forward with the estimates in expenses and revenue as put forth tonight as general guidelines only, not specifics as I had mentioned.
So whether we think they're reasonable or not, it
Yes.
makes sense to us. Okay, great. Council, questions that you might have and comments? Councilmember Martinez.
Thank you for putting this together. It was a lot of information, a lot of really good stuff. My question is back on slide 32 about debt financing alternatives. If we would like to consider continuing the debt service past, 2023 and 2036 for the recreation go bonds and police headquarter go bonds, is that something that has to go back to the citizens for a vote?
I can't answer that question off the top of my head. I will get back to you. I
assume
would say,
so.
I was going to say
Okay.
yes.
I would assume so.
Me too.
The
but I
answer
don't
is
like to make
yes from both
assumptions.
the attorney and the manager.
Thank you.
Anything further? Member Martinez?
That's it for me right now.
Mayor Pro Tem Russell?
I have a question on the May 11th budget workshop. Will the results be back from the rate study, the sewer rate study, and will we be updated on that?
No, they will not be ready yet. I think they'll prepare some guidelines, but I don't think it'll be prepared yet, no.
Well, and then on one of these slides back here, the question that I had, and it was on the, I don't remember which one it was, but it was about the sewer fund had gone down quite a bit, even with the 7% increase that we
Yes.
approved.
Yes. At the time that information was presented to you, I believe that it was also shared that there was still going to be a drop in the fund balance at the end of the year. And so I think when, as the director is looking at his budget for next year, he's going to actually prepare for a study session that can talk about proposed increases as it relates, but I don't believe the study will be completed yet.
Okay, and will he also be talking to us about increasing the rates for the connector districts because they are paying less than the citizens in Inglewood, and that is problematic?
So thank you for the question. This morning, I actually participated in a conversation with the individuals that are bidding on the proposal to look at the cost analysis study, and that was part of the discussion, that would be reviewed.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have for right now.
Others? Councilmember Berentine?
I appreciate the presentation. The only alternatives for financing have been to go ahead and increase funds. I hope that at our next meeting that there's some information on how much we can go ahead and garner from any additional savings in our budget, not just increasing it. Between this 2016, this community has indebted itself by $242.9 million. You add the other school bond into that, and while that excludes about 7,000 of our citizens, that's an additional $335.9 million that we've put ourselves into debt. And that's a lot of money. That's rough figures, even if you just take the 26, it's $13,000 for every man, woman, and child that we've indebted them already. So I'm not sure how much with the parks issues coming up and the water and sewer, the storm sewer infrastructure coming up, I don't know how much we can end up bearing. So I would like to know what the city is willing to do to contribute that, not just what we're going to raise on our citizens who are already voluntarily burden themselves quite a bit already, but there is always a tipping point. So I hope that that's going to include some information for where we're cutting back in the city.
Okay, thank you.
Is it planned to be?
So when we present the general fund budget, and when I spoke to it tonight, I talked about the reserves that were available. As I said, when we're putting together the budgets, we're not going to just take the 3% and add it on top. We are going to talk about how it supports the vision, and certainly you will have an opportunity as a council to weigh into the budgets as we're moving forward, and I think those discussions can take place regarding the needs in order to provide the services that are expected versus the relative costs, and those pointed questions can be asked to the directors during the workshop period. If there are fund balances that are are left because we've got additional revenue, which I spoke about tonight. You know, we know that the 6.6 million is available. If we have additional revenue, the expectation is that we would come in at our budget or below, as we did in 2019 or 2018, excuse me, and those funds will go into the reserve, and then it becomes a policy question for City Council as to whether or not you want to spend those funds on the capital projects we bring forth.
Thank you. Councilmember Cuesta?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Director Sobota. Going back to Mayor Pro Tem's question, what is the decrease in the sewer fund attributable to? It's coming in at about $4.5 million.
So it is the O&M and capital costs of the South Platte Water Renewal Fund. So those are the budgeted expenses as part of the 2019 budget that were put forth related to O&M and capital costs.
Thank you. Secondly, you've got a 3% increase predicted for 2020. Between 2018 and 2019, it was 3.63. So it's gone down, and it would be less of an increase for 2020 than between 2019 and 2020 than it was between 2018 and 2019. So that's good. It's going in the right direction. It's a smaller amount. When we looked at some of the final totals, or what was getting close to be the final totals, I think we still had 1 month remaining on some of the departments. There was a fair amount of unused funds in the budget, and I'm hoping that maybe, and who's to say it wasn't used towards the end of the year, I'm hoping that maybe there were some areas where instead of even kicking it up 3%, we're even maybe tightening the belt there. To Councilmember Barentine's point, if there's places that we can make that up, it'd be great. Now, I certainly don't think we're going to make up enough money to replace our sewer and drainage, replace all our parks, replace our alleys, whatever the case may be. But 3 is a good start. It's less than last year. But I'm hoping we can even go a little further south of that. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Russell.
Along the lines of Councilmember Barentine's question, and I do appreciate, I do want to say that I do appreciate, I didn't see the fiscal cliff this year, first time, probably since I've been on council, but just would like to address instead of looking even for more revenues, the idea of cutting spending. And actually, there's a citizen that I have talked to that worked for a large company and was in charge of a department, and each department was required to cut costs by 5% every year. So I think that might be a good target for the departments to look at, is how can I cut costs in this department by 5%, instead of just going back to the taxpayers for more money or looking for more revenue. So I think that would be a good thing to add. Thank you.
Councilmember Barentine?
I believe for the water and sewer, I just wanted to clarify this since the Mayor Pro Tem brought it up, was my understanding when Director Brennan was here that he said that the 7%, while we've only approved it for 1 year and it's temporary, was only going to garner an additional approximately $1.5 million and not make up the entire amount of the deficit for that reserve where we're supposed to be at, although that is only supposed to go 1 year. Is that correct?
The increase of 7%, I think, yes, it was approved for 1 year, but the thought was he was going to come back with more justification as to how that would transpire, go into future years as well. Is that?
But it was the understanding, just to address part of her question, it was always known that that 7% would never make up that deficit of that reserve. I mean, it's just not going to in 1 year, even at 7%.
Correct.
The amount of, what has been the amount of increase in our revenue, just roughly in the last 5 years? Or 3, or whatever it is that you have.
So if we go back to animated slides. So here we go. Oops. So this gives a look at the revenue in the particular component, sales and use tax, property tax, and all other revenue, the increases that have occurred over the past 5 years. Is that your question?
I'm having a little trouble seeing that
Okay.
slide. So in millions, just how much have we increased in revenue that we take in the last 5 years?
So in 2015, you can see it was approximately 45 million. I don't have the number specifically in front of me. And then in 2019, we're looking at probably close to 3 million more on top of that. I'm trying to do it visually here. Yeah, it looks to be about 3 million.
Okay. And I'm not thinking that that's, when I saw this before, well, because I can't really see it right now, even with my glasses on, but the amount of money, we have $6 million additional this year that we were over, that we've put to capital improvements, correct?
No, that was the,
9.6, right?
so if you're talking about what we ended the year at, so it was
Additional that we were able to-
9.9 million. That wasn't just revenue, that was also savings and expenditures as well. So we did not spend our full budgeted amount last year. We were at 94%, I believe, that we reported unaudited numbers. So the dollars that we saved last year carry forward into the reserve balance.
Correct. But in each of those 5 years, our budgeted expenditures have gone up as well. I mean, they've never stayed the same in any of in the last 5 years. So it's not possible for us to go ahead and, since we raised that, even if we didn't spend all of the money that we budgeted and have 9 million at the end and only have 3 million additional in the last 5 years. If we had just stayed even with the amount of expenditures that we had, I would like to get a little bit better estimate that if we had just stayed even or a little bit less of an increase, where we would be. Because I think in 1 year that we were able to go ahead, didn't spend all of what we budgeted, even though it was more than the previous year, we ended up at the end of the year with $9 million. So something, it just kind of isn't gelling for me on how that could happen if in the last 5 years we only increased the revenue by $3 million. And we've expended more money than we did in each of the 5 years. So I need to kind of get some more information to wrap around how we could end up with this year the 9 million or 6.3 or whatever it is, because apparently some of it got spent, and then not answer how we got there. That it just isn't fleshing out. So maybe we could get some additional information to kind of answer that question.
Okay. I can certainly do like a carry forward or a roll forward from 2015, and I can talk about the increase in revenues versus how the expenditures actually turned out for those years. But I will say, so we left 2018 unaudited with 9.9 million. As part of the budget process, council approved a $3.1 million transfer. So out of the general fund into the capital improvement fund. So that is why there's $6.6 million that we're starting 2019 with, because the transfer occurred, and it was evident in the slide. So it wasn't just somehow spent. That was an approved expenditure.
Oh, no, I
okay.
apologize for that.
Okay.
And
Just
to
wanted to make
anybody
sure.
in the public, I wasn't trying to make any assumption, but when they're hearing two different numbers, but either one wouldn't make sense, whether it was the 9 million or the 6 million, that we only increased in revenue over the last 5 years by $3 million. Our expenditures go up every single year, and somehow at the end of this year, we ended up with 9.9 million. Because if we were able to do that, still increase our expenditures, only increase our revenue by 3 and still end up with 9 million at the end of the year, we would be able to do a lot of capital improvement projects without raising any taxes. So when we're trying to explain that to people, if we could get a little bit better figures, I have a feeling that the revenue went up a lot more than that, or because I know the expenditures did not decrease over the last 5 years. So if we could just kind of explain that, that'd be awesome.
Okay.
I think a visual that you could come up with, I think, not sure exactly, do you know what you're trying to get with this
do.
one? Okay,
I
great.
do.
Okay, great. Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Russell.
The $3.1 million reminded me of another question that I had. Can you remind me why we approved that $3.1 million? Was part of that to do the roof of the city center?
It is. 1.6 million of that was the Civic Center roofing replacement. There was also, majority of it was within Public Works. There was a facility and operations, including the Malley Center gym and ballroom refinish. Another large one was a fiber and wireless network expenditure. I do have the list that I could include in our capital discussion on April 22nd, if you'd like.
That would be great. And have we fixed the roof on City Center?
I hear a lot of pounding above my
Argo?
head.
No, it is not fixed yet. They're going out for final design, and any contracting would come to City Council for approval, so you'd be part of that process.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is great information. I heard two things that not everyone said that we probably need to discuss as a whole. One was Mayor Pro Tem Russell asking for a budget that's a 5% cut across each department, which is quite different in a business than it is a city. But I think Councilmember Cuesta was sort of broaching into the same thing of 3% is great. What would it look like if it was even lower? Is there a way to do an estimate of what would it look like if we only had a 2.5% increase in expenses for the year? And what would it look like if we had a 3%? And what impact would that have on services? What services would have to go? I mean, when we were in the worst of it through 2008 through 10, 11, that's what we had to do every year, and that's why we did our budgets, was figuring out what the least likely possibility was and what the best possibility was. And but that takes a lot of time too, and it's expecting us to not. I mean, I don't think you can give the same services if you cut like that. So we'd have to know what it is that we'd have to be expending.
Can I respond?
Yeah, please do.
So when we met in February, we actually showed a chart that showed what was personnel costs versus contractual costs. And, you know, we have to look at discretionary versus non-discretionary costs when we do that analysis, and we did. And the amount of funds that would be able to be used for capital, even with the 5% reduction, would not even be a large enough amount to make a dent in our capital need. I certainly can put that together for a discussion. And certainly as we're working on what I call our work plan budgets, as we're doing our line item budgets, it's certainly something that when we talk during our workshops, each department director can talk about, you know, what they were able to look at relative to what they've spent the last several years, certainly.
One thing that would be helpful with this, I know that you've done this before, would be to show where redundancies have been discovered and then cut costs because of it. And sometimes we don't hear about those, but we know you're doing them, and that's why you're under the expenditures that was estimated for the year. Kind of tracking those as they go would be really, really helpful. And then if you see something you think, you know, the city doesn't really probably need to be doing something. I've never been for, I've worked in a number of organizations where cuts have had to be made, and never ever has it worked to say every single department has to cut, you know, this percent. It just doesn't work like that. You can't get every department down like that. You can get some over others in their trade-offs. So I would prefer not to have every single department look at it, but if we could have departments look at, if it was squeezed a bit more, where would that go? I don't think our residents are asking for that particularly. I think they're wanting to make sure they know where it is going. And you've done a tremendous job in showing some of the things that I haven't seen quite displayed like this before. So I really appreciate the visuals that you've been using. So, but Councilmember Cuesta might want to jump in on this.
Thank you. You bet. And I don't think it has to be uniform across all departments necessarily. I think it's where are those areas where maybe there was some excess in a department's budget that we might be able to bring it back in. I also think it's a false premise to say we can't possibly cut or we lose services, because again, between 18 and 19, the budget went up 3.63%. This year it's a 3% increase proposed. So right off the bat, we've lost 0.63%. And I don't assume there's any services that are being proposed to be discontinued or reduced.
So I'd just like to address that.
Yeah.
This is an assumption, the 3%. We are just starting to build our budgets, and it's a guideline that we're putting forth. So I'm not going to say that's where we'll land specifically. We'll certainly try, you know, and we'll take into account the other suggestions that you had as well.
Great. Councilmember Barentine?
Even when I was with the Arapahoe Community College, I mean, there is no organization I've ever been at that they had said, you're the sacred cow and you don't have to think outside of the box and look at your department and see what you can do and at least come up with some ideas. I don't know how other organizations do it, but I've never seen one where they would offend certain departments by saying you're exempt, you're the sacred cow, you get to skip and you can have your money, and the rest of the people are going to sacrifice and try to be creative and try to think how they can cut things. I think it is an excellent exercise for people to go through that process, and I would like to see if it just stayed exactly the same, as well as some potential cut of maybe not 5%, but at least a 1% cut would look like, and then what we would be supposedly missing if they didn't get some kind of increase. I would also like, in the next presentation, for us to have an explanation of what eventually was phrased as unrealized losses when we had several people come and discuss our investments, and they did a beautiful job of explaining it to me, and I went and looked and got some additional information, and I understand now what you're talking about, the unrealized losses, because it wasn't actually a 2% increase in our investment because there were losses there. So if you would bring some of the information for that investment piece of it and what you were referring to with the unrealized losses at that time so that we can have a little bit more of a conversation, I'd appreciate it.
Can I address both of those comments?
Yes.
Okay. On the first item relating to the work plan budgeting, so this is my first year as Director of Finance for the City of Englewood. I agree with you. I have never not built a budget where everyone had to defend, each department director needed not to defend, to talk about the resources that they need, the discretionary spend they need, and this is the process we're going to. We're starting meetings next week where I will meet and Jenny will meet with each department director, and we will go line item by line item. So we are taking that approach. It's a little bit different. I think in the past, the department directors were given a template, they gave it back to us. Maybe we did, maybe we didn't ask a lot of questions. I'm not saying that we didn't, but I'm hoping that this year we will provide you with those answers. And that's part of the workshop. I mean, everything that we're building into it is really based on supporting the community goals that we have and doing just that, you know, justifying the spend. And that's the type of budgeting that I think I may have told you I was accustomed to before coming to the city, and what I plan to do here, regardless of whether or not it's been done in the past. I hope that it's helpful to the department directors versus you know, a scary thing to have to sit with me and go through it. But I think it's important for the reasons that were just mentioned. Secondly, I think we have addressed many times the unrealized loss. I did not say that there was an unrealized loss. A citizen came to the table and mentioned that, and there have been 2 council requests that we have responded to. That unrealized loss has nothing to do with anything that we were talking about tonight. It's based on our investments. The interest income we collect certainly is part of our revenue, and that's been a positive number. There has been no loss. The unrealized loss would be if we would decide to sell off all our assets at once, and we would never do that at a loss position. So I'm not clear, if you could ask your question again, what further information can I provide to you that hasn't been previously provided in a council request? I'd be happy to do that, but there is no unrealized loss in our investments. I don't know what else to provide.
Thank you. I will let Councilmember Barentine answer that quickly, and then if it needs to be through email or something, that'd be great too. Councilmember Barentine? No response to that?
Whether you were responding to something somebody had given you, I believe that you had come forward and said that we had some unrealized losses. The money that we garner for our interest is part of our budget, and the expectation that we at least would have a 2% increase in that is not what we ended up with. So maybe at least make it part of how we're going to be moving forward as what we expect, at least on the interest. And for the rest of it, then I'll go ahead and do a council request.
Okay.
Because I'm responding to what I believe you had brought forward. If I am inaccurate, I will go back and listen to the tape, so let me have an opportunity to do that, and I'll formulate the question again.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Martinez.
Thank you. I think every budget cycle, we look at how we can be the most efficient with our resources. So that's nothing new. We do that, each year as part of the process. But what I would like us to do is take a look at through the lens of our community goals, which is we're going to revisit. And I think that's where we can really see is the majority of our budget being spent on the largest part of our goals, and kind of look at it that way instead of, a different way. To me, that makes the most sense. So I would just like the council to remember that we're going to be revisiting our community goals and make sure we're all solid on that, and then that should be part of what dictates where the budget lies. So just want to remind us of that.
Thank you. I appreciate your description of how you're going to go back with each of the departments, and I'm sure it's been done in various ways over the years, so I hope that having a new person is always great for someone to see and have to explain things a little differently, and so I look forward to seeing what you find through that. I think for me, when I look at some of the great work that you've done on possible financing going forward on some of the big items which are not going to be realized through just cutting back 2% in a department here, there, everywhere, that we're going to have to be able to fully explain to the citizens and helping them understand why we need to go for more funding in some area or another and how we're going to pay for it. So I wanted to make sure we've done every possible thing that we can to show where and that part of that might just be disclosing more of how we have saved. I know we had some cost savings attempts that we've done over the last couple of years. The fire department, of course, made a big difference too. But if we can articulate those better to everyone, and I think as a goal of transparency, that will really help as we try and make these really hard decisions for big amounts going forward. So I appreciate it. Looks like, does that give you enough information and direction?
It does, and thank you for that. And I will definitely plan, if we don't talk about that roll forward before May 11th, maybe that's the way we kick off the workshop. Don't know. Or maybe as part of the capital discussion. So we'll talk about it as a staff. And then I also want to say, you've mentioned several times, all of you, about the presentation. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Jenny Nolan. I mean, she really helped, and she's not here at the podium. I am presenting it, but and many people on the team in the finance organization are giving me information when I ask, so that I'm able to articulate it as best as I can, and I'm very grateful to them. So I just wanted to make sure I mentioned them.
Thank you. Thanks to the whole team then on our behalf.
Thank you.
Great. Council, we're up for a little break, and we'll be back. Let's take about a 5-7 minute break and come back and talk about CAC.
I appreciate it. Of course, thank you. You're doing, it's a great start.
We could resume our seats and we'll continue on. Is that the right word? Resume? No, retake our seats and resume. Council, our next item is the Code Enforcement Advisory Committee update, and City Attorney Alison McKenney Brown can help us with this tonight. What Mayor Pro Tem and I did last week is we kind of made a little switch on you that may not have been fully understood in the email that was sent, and so I want to acknowledge that. When we met in the mayor-manager meeting and realized when CAC would be meeting again, that we might not have enough of this done, and we wanted to be able to honor the 8 weeks. So we were trying to not hurry, but yeah, it was hurrying. It was asking you to give your input on the proposed changes much earlier than the week of next week. And so only one person sent anything in response to the email with some ideas of what they thought was good or bad about the proposals. So I'm wondering if tonight, if it might be better to go with our original plan of giving you up until next Monday to get information to the city attorney about what you find in the changes to be helpful or unhelpful or any red flags, with the caveat that you would not just say, I want to talk about this or I want to talk about that, but actually what is it that you're finding problematic, and perhaps a solution for it or a rewording, that would be a little bit more helpful, and then we could try and put it on the agenda going forward. So I'm going to ask that to begin with. We can certainly go through it tonight if you want to. And then the second part of this would be that we would have CEAC meet in April at the third Wednesday, I believe, is when Mayor Pro Tem told me they meet, and that they would also give us feedback. So we'd be both doing this sort of at the same time. So that's an idea I'm proposing. Mayor Pro Tem Russell, I think, might have been first.
The only thing I wanted to share, because when you just shared what you did, all of a sudden it clicked. When we send in all of our thoughts to whoever, the city manager or whatever, so we don't have to discuss it in public, the purpose of us meeting is to discuss it in public so the public can hear what we're thinking. And so I think that kind of bypasses the transparency issue when we do that.
Oh, could I answer that? I think you misunderstood what I said. So, for instance, like on the policy manual, some people just wrote in which line they wanted that they had a problem with, but not what the problem would be, so that the city attorney could look and say, oh, okay, well, that's going to be some background information on maybe state statute that I'm going to need to bring to that. We would still have the conversation about it, but just a little bit more about what is it about that one that you have trouble with. So, for instance, I didn't like some wording in something. I thought it was still not worded well, and I said, this still doesn't have clarity for me, but I like where you're getting on it, but I'd like to have this rewritten. You're going to see I'm the one who put in a couple things, but so I would not want to cut that part short at all. I'm just saying flesh it out a little bit more, so maybe give a line a little bit more than just what the numbers is, but actually what is it about that you would like to raise as an issue.
Okay, so, and is it okay for me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Too?
I'm fine.
In the policy manual, and why I just sent in the sections that I wanted to talk about, it wasn't any, a lot of this stuff in the policy manual we already had discussed, and so it wasn't specific. There were things that I wanted removed, but if I want them removed or added, I think the public has a right to know the information that is coming forward. So that's why when I responded to that request, I just picked out the sections that I wanted to talk about. That's why I didn't pick out what.
And I would want the public to know that. If you wanted it removed and that's what you want to bring up, then it would be nice to say, I don't even think we need this, and we would all be able to look at it and go, okay, well, I'm going to have to be thinking about that, and it gives us more time to actually think about it as we come here. That's all it was. So, no, I totally agree with you. I would not want that to then be done to it. I want us then to talk about it so we all know what everybody's put on the table. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Okay. Did you have something else, too?
No, not right now.
Okay. Councilmember Barentine.
We're still talking about the Code Enforcement Advisory Board review?
Yes.
Okay.
In my proposal to have us do what I suggested.
Well, the conversation got off onto the policies, and so I think it kind of got a little confusing there. I believe that to your original, what I believe was the original question, I think since we have 2 members missing, that we would be better off to go ahead and wait the additional week and allow this to be a little bit more lined up with the next meeting of code enforcement, if it is the intent, although I didn't know that council had discussed or decided that, but if that's what we're going to do, then I would like to make sure that it's more lined up when they're going to be able to review it.
Councilmember Cuesta.
Thank you, Mayor. So to repeat that back, if I'm understanding correctly, we're going to reinstate CEAC?
Well, we had said we were putting them on a hiatus for 8 weeks, and if we don't have them meet in their April meeting, it'll go beyond 8 weeks, and so I'm trying to stay good with that. We could, of course, we can decide anything. We can decide to keep it going for another month if we're not done yet, and so that's another opportunity.
You bet. And just now you mentioned, though, you would have them meet for April?
What I would suggest, this is only my idea, I'd like to hear your thoughts, we can decide together, well, obviously decide together. I would prefer that their only content that night would be to walk through the proposal and give us some feedback. Obviously, we have to be the ones who make the decision. This isn't about any one individual on that Code Advisory Commission. This is about the future of the whole thing and what do we want it to do. I'll give you a background of, can I tell you one more thing? So I have had a number of phone calls in the last month from people who think that code enforcement itself was put on hold. As they've talked to some people who actually are on the committee, said, well, no one's doing any code enforcement because we're not operating anymore, which is not true. Code enforcement's been out every day. They actually did something last week that was extremely helpful, and someone called me and thanked me. So there is a misunderstanding about what this advisory committee is, and that's what I think we're trying to get right. We need their input too, but the public now believes that the Code Enforcement Advisory Committee is actually the enforcement group, and that isn't. They're an advisory group. So I'm really concerned about that, and I don't mind if they give us feedback on it. I want some feedback from them. We're ultimately going to have to decide how this works for the city so that there's not this misunderstanding about what the role of the committee is.
Sure. Well, and I would like to reinforce that, yes, code enforcement is still out there doing their job. They helped one of my neighbors out with something this past week, too. So then, if I'm understanding correctly, what you had in mind was that the CEAC would still meet, but just in the scope of whatever proposals.
Well, I heard from a couple people last week that they really wanted them to give feedback on it, and I don't have trouble with that. I think we're the final deciders, so.
And that gives me the clarification. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Martinez.
Okay, when are they scheduled to meet again? Which date?
Third Wednesday in April is what I
Third
believe
Wednesday.
it is.
Okay, so I would like to have them reviewed as well, but I would like to have our recommendations solidly buttoned up. So if we think that gives us enough time to do that before they meet, I'm all for that. Because I think it would be beneficial to have the other two members of our council weigh in.
Councilmember Berentine.
I haven't had the confusion about what the Code Enforcement Advisory Council does like you experienced. What I've had the confusion on is why we're putting them on hiatus. I mean, why they're being stopped. So I don't think anybody thought that code enforcement was stopping, but that they didn't have the additional encouragement to take care of some of the issues, as code enforcement has been a serious problem in the community. It was brought up again at the alley meeting. It's been a contentious issue. So I believe that they think that it's just not the emphasis on making sure that we're getting things done and that we're putting more emphasis on this board rather than on code enforcement doing resolving the problems, the very serious problems that they've had in the community. So I'm sure that you have experienced more of that, but I just wanted to say I think the confusion's been with why we focused on the board instead of fixing the issues with code enforcement. And I've already said that I think matching it up would probably be a good idea.
Mayor Pro Tem Russell.
I think there's another problem going on now because one of the code enforcement committee got a notice that they were up for reappointment, and that needs to be resolved. I mean, we're trying to figure that out. But there has also been emails to the code enforcement chair and 2 other people to write letters of recommendation, and the code enforcement chair sent an email to me and Councilmember Sierra wanting to know what their responsibility is, because they want to honor council putting them on hiatus, and what is the legality of them going ahead and doing what they've been asked to do. And this will impact the committee because those are due by the first week in April. So we need to have an answer for that as well.
So could I ask you on the first question, are you, you're fine with delaying our discussion tonight?
I am okay with delaying our discussions. I actually like what you suggested, that we would be working on it at the same time code would be working on it, and they would be able to give feedback. But I'm not sure that I want them to be limited only to that. That will be their focus. But I think there are some other things that they need to be doing, like these other, I don't think they're big things that need to be done.
Okay. Councilmember Martinez.
So just process-wise, are we thinking that we're going to send our feedback, I like this, I don't, I would rather have it read like this, to the city manager and or the city attorney, and then come back as a group and discuss each one, or just give the feedback and then we just review it and not discuss each section?
No, the former. We would each, this was the plan last week when we asked you to do this, was to send something to the city attorney by Thursday, right? Would it have to be?
Yeah, the packet closes on Thursday at noon, so if I have it at some point in the middle of the day on Wednesday, I could still probably get something put together and into the packet on Thursday. So it's really a quick time. I don't think the public realizes how fast the turnaround is for these packets, but I would need it by at least by the end of day Wednesday at the very last moment.
So what I would hope that we each could do be look at each section. We see the changes that city attorney has proposed, and make a comment about, you know, I'm fine with that, or I think this is still unclear, and this is what I think is unclear about it. Or, you know, if you don't want to say anything about what you just want to talk about, that's fine. But it would be helpful if we knew what it was, so that at least that can be addressed a bit with the attorney coming in. I've already sent mine, a good part of it I don't have trouble with, so mine's not very complicated.
Yeah, I don't have trouble with it either, so I didn't send anything because I think it's fine as proposed, but I'm assuming that the feedback we're all going to send are going to be in somewhat differing opinions. So
Sure.
I just wonder, I don't want to have to put that on the city attorney to write something.
No, what I was hoping is that perhaps on each one, we'd see all the different comments, not attributed to anybody in particular. These are, you know, I'm concerned about this language, or I think it's redundancy, or I think it's, you know, it's out of scope, or whatever, or it's just fine. And we'll just see those in each section. If someone says, I don't want this at all, or I don't like this, it helps me to know before I get there as I'm thinking about it. But if you don't want to do that, you just want to go through it one by one, we can. One of the things that we do need to do is, so we'll probably time each one and say we're going to spend 5 minutes on this one, 5 minutes on the next, so that we can get through it. So the more information we can get out to each other beforehand, I think would be useful. Does that make sense? Councilmember Barentine.
I downloaded a copy from the last week, and we've got like, I don't know, 4 or 5 pages here. The whole thing is like, what, 5 paragraphs, 6 paragraphs altogether? Really don't think this is some kind of in-depth, when you look at it on the I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, I apologize. I was just responding to you. Go ahead.
I wasn't just speaking to you, I apologize, I shouldn't have just been looking at you, but the whole code is only a few paragraphs, and it's really pretty concise already. So I really don't think that this big, huge process of, you know, sending emails back and forth to somebody to go ahead and say exactly what we have a problem with is really necessary. I think it really is important that we just have the conversation in public. It's very small.
Thank you. We will then have anyone who wants to have input into any of this to be helpful, move it forward, get it to our city attorney by Wednesday late afternoon so that she can put those together, and we will try and find a time on the study session. And I'm not sure it's going to actually be next week's, though, is it? I'll leave that up to the tomorrow's decision-making. All right, so that's the other piece of it.
Pardon me, Mayor. Could
Yes.
I ask for some clarification regarding to the Mayor Pro Tem's question about the reappointment
Right.
activity? That's a council decision, so I think some guidance and consensus about that so that we could communicate that clearly to the committee would be helpful.
Yes, that was the next thing I was going to say is that for the meeting in April, I would prefer to limit their discussion to giving us feedback, and then, because we haven't quite finalized the policy, and then the second thing would be to give in, to decide on whether who they're going to put forward, or can they don't have to do that in a meeting, do they? It can be done as the chair to decide if they're going to recommend people going forward.
I'd have to check on the process. I'm not clear.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
I think it's a letter from the chair, says the city attorney, so the
Okay,
chair
so-
could do that outside the meeting.
Question for the city attorney is, since we put him on a hiatus, is it a problem for asking the chair to do a recommendation before the deadline?
No. I just think that it's critical that the manager reaches out to the chair and requests that the chair put the recommendation together. But this is your committee. They're appointed by you. They act in the manner that you request that they act, and they're carrying out the requests of council. So if this is a request of council, I'm sure they'd be happy to do it.
Thank you. I am not sure who is next, so maybe Councilmember Barentine again? Or Councilmember Cuesta, and then I'll go to Martinez.
Thank you. I wouldn't say that going forward, I'm especially supportive of a process of us sending in notes and kind of formulating these things through email, and then it comes before us. I think in this particular case, to try and expedite this, we told these folks 8 weeks. It's a voluntary citizen board, and if there's corrections we need to make, we certainly should. But I think just a matter of simple professionalism, we gave them this date, and we should get them back in action. Now, having said that, we get them back, they meet again in April, but they're still not really performing the duties of the CEAC, at least as we're describing it now. They'll just be reviewing some documents we sent them. So this still seems to me a half measure. Now, given that there's things we need to work out, and if I had to predict some of the thoughts that folks might have on that CEAC, I don't think they'll see this either, is we're back to performing our role as they see it. So I think this is good. Some meeting is better than nothing, and they will be working towards hopefully these clarifications that we all are seeking. But I think it is, again, still a half measure, and we're going to have to go a step further. As I imagine we all need to, but I hope it isn't April becomes May, becomes June, and we're still kind of sorting through these things. Thank you.
Councilmember Barentine will go next.
I believe that the question that the Mayor Pro Tem asked was that she had been asked that the chair is being asked to perform something that's more of an official request, and it was made very clear that they were not to perform any official duties. So it's understandable that they would ask council, can I perform an official duty? I'm being requested to make an assessment and provide a letter. So if we could address that. And then the second thing I want us to resolve is that we still haven't even asked code enforcement for their rendition or for their justification of what happened that put them on hiatus and caused all this rigmarole, because they were never given an opportunity to address council or discuss that with us, and I want to make sure that that's part of this process as well. These rules are being changed in an effort to stop or prevent or squash some behavior that we're not even sure happened the way that we're trying to address it. So I think that we should make sure that that's inclusive of them having some opportunity as a volunteer board to express their concern about what was the catalyst for all of this. So those two things.
Councilmember Martinez.
I look at it like we're refining and honing in and fine-tuning their role so they can be more successful and achieve the goals that we want them to achieve. So that's how I see it. And I don't see that we're only going to have one more meeting on this, one study session, and then we're done. I think we're going to talk about it again. They're going to discuss it, give their feedback, and we'll probably discuss it again at least one more time. So I think it's going to be, you know, not just one more meeting. It'll take some more time, but I'm fine with them moving forward with recommendations. If they still need to do those functions as we're working through this process, I am comfortable with them, the chair, writing a letter of recommendation to reappointment.
Thank you. So we'll move ahead on that. I don't think everything that has been asked for tonight will happen. I'm not in favor of trying to go back over burned ground when we decided to move forward with a hiatus and try and figure out what is the role and make it really clear. That's what this goal is now, is to make it really clear what the goal and the roles are for this particular commission, and that's what we're doing. So we're moving forward. I don't want to do he said, she said anymore. It's time to move on and get it really clear as to what this board and commission is supposed to accomplish, how we can support them in it, and continue to get great people on the board. Unless it's something new, Councilmember Barentine, I want to move on. Is there something new?
I'm sure you would. I do want to address what you said, only to comment in that that's exactly what this council did. We attacked people personally, we made accusations, and we never gave them the opportunity to have their say, and we did it publicly. And I find that reprehensible, and it was the catalyst for the actions that we took. That's what I'm...
Thank you. On to the next is number 5, Agenda 5 is a council policy manual, and again, in this particular area, we have quite a few things to talk through. City Attorney Alison McKenney Brown is here to help lead us a bit through it. Maybe you can give us some perspective, Attorney Brown, but perhaps if you could give us some reminder of where we are with pages 1 and 2, because those are the ones we've already talked about, and then where we begin with the next.
So if you look at your entire packet, which runs to 152 pages at this point, the first 2 pages are the council communication, and you can skip past that because I'm sure you've already read that, or first 3 pages. Then you'll see that I've posted a memorandum, and you saw a version of this memorandum the last time this came before you. Page 1 of that memorandum, issue 1, is an issue that you as a body have already discussed, and you came up with your solution, which I listed as modification. Issue 2, issue 3, issue 4, issue 5, and issue 6 are all modifications you've already discussed and agreed upon. If you look on page 3 of that memo, the city manager and I created a comprehensive document showing all of the areas that the council members suggested that they wanted to review. So it begins with section 3, A1 on the mayor. Somebody sent in a issue or concern on subsection A, which is a reprint of the charter, and that person's statement was this should be put out to citizens for a vote to elect the mayor. Obviously, we can't change the charter, but we can remove the charter language if you should decide. And then subsection D, there was somebody who wanted to revisit the issue of swearing in or sworn in by the judge. And I'm not going to go through each of those, but I'm wanting you to see section 4. There were issues associated with subsection A, D, H, J, K, and L. Subsection 5, there were 3 issues out of both the general, the study session policy, and the public meeting policy. Subsection 6, only 1 question about computer supplies technology. Quite a bit came out of subsection 8 on communications policy, especially the email communications. A small question on council vacancy, and a couple of comments on the telephonic participation. And then keep going. Section 11 was the proposed annual review of the city officers and the municipal judge. The municipal judge also weighed in on that because he did not like the language that we borrowed from another city, because he said it just didn't apply to his situation. So I sent his memo out to all of you, as well as copying it word for word here. And then one member of council provided several invocation suggestions for updated invocations, and I just grouped all of that right at the end. So those are the changes you all as a body sent in and said you would like to review as a body. And I don't know at this point if there's any real role for staff other than just to take notes as you discuss it.
Okay, great. Why don't we do this? Let's set a limit of 5 minutes on each section or each part of the section, and we may be able to go faster than that on each. And I don't want to limit Mayor Pro Tem's involvement in this by asking you to time something, but maybe city manager would be willing. Well, I think it's hard for any of us to participate. Would that be okay? Would you say, so I actually think we could get through a few of these tonight, and then we'll have to do it again. Does that seem reasonable for everybody? So let's start with the first one, Section 3, the mayor. I thought we actually had already figured this out.
Point of information, can I ask?
Councilmember Barentine?
Please. We have a third of our body not here. I don't know who all made the suggestions to include certain areas. Are the two members that are not here, did they advise somebody on what problems that they had with the sections that they might have included?
They both did send things in, yes.
They did, those two did provide comments, and anywhere that a council member provided comments, you'll see that I built those comments directly in.
So the two missing members, I mean, a third of us in here to discuss that, so I feel kind of a little, that it won't be well represented for finding out why they had maybe a problem with something. The other problem with procedure that I had was that we've included something like the invocations that wasn't even in this from the beginning, and then we've gone backwards on things that we already agreed to. So in an effort to streamline it, we ended up opening up the can of worms again for some of these things, and I'm kind of confused.
I think it'll be easy to get to when we get to invocation on that one. I would like to at least get a couple of these done. I'd like to at least get the very first one done. I thought we had agreed that the mayor was, that someone needs to go to ballot for it. If we want to do that as a group, we can certainly come back with that, but writing it in the policy right now doesn't make sense. And the selection of the mayor, I thought we also agreed, would not be sworn in by a judge.
Mayor, with all due respect, my question was, are we going to revisit the issues that we had already gone through? Because I thought we had already come to consensus up to a certain point, and now we seem to be going back to the very beginning again.
No, pages 1 through 2 are those we'd already done.
There are questions on adopting those rules, and that's the very first page.
No, those are the ones we all agreed to. Pages 1 and 2 are the ones we already agreed to. Issue number 6 is the first one that she asked us to, oh, I guess I've actually missed that one. Gender neutralizing. Is that what you're talking about? Councilmember Barentine, is that what you're talking about?
There were references to the very first page of adopting those rules aside from the gender neutral language. My question is simple. Are we going back from the very beginning and doing it from the very beginning?
No, my understanding from the city attorney is what she's already changed is what we gave input to up to issue number 6. And then starting on page 3 at the top of the page. Is that correct, city attorney?
The gender neutral comment came in from a couple of you, but you've all already commented that you'd like to have the document be gender neutral, so you can jump past that and look on that page 3 of the memo, and it's not starting at the beginning, it's starting at section 3. There were 2 comments on mayor, and once those 2 are addressed, you can move right to section 4. There were 2 comments on order of meeting, 1 comment on the minutes of the meeting. I highlighted that section because that's what the council member wanted. So No, I think there's a little bit of an argument that could be made that the mayor discussion has already taken place, but if someone threw it in there, I assume that they thought that it hadn't been, so I went ahead and included it.
All right. Councilmember Questi, you may be the one who'd.
Yeah, thank you, appreciate it. Just to be clear, we are on page 6 of the packet, which is page 3 of the memorandum.
Correct.
Thank you.
So on section 3, can we agree that anybody want to, I'm going to actually ask that I'm going to turn your lights off for a second and go back to this one, and then I will, can we say that section 3 is taken care of? That if that's going to come forward in some voter elected mayor, that has to come in another way. We can't put that in the policy right now. And secondly, we already agreed that we wouldn't have a swearing in of a judge. If anybody disagrees, light your light. Mayor Pro Tem Russell.
Okay, so I just wanted to make sure, I have written in my packet, section 3D was going to be deleted.
We're on 3A1 right now.
Okay. I thought we
A1,
had discussed all of that,
I
so.
did too. So you're correct, right? Okay, good. I agree with you, but it's still on there because someone did submit a request to have that in there. So that's all there is. So on to section 4, which is meetings. We have, someone gave a number of things on invocation. That is correct, that we've never had that in here before. I would simply say if people want certain invocation prayers, whatever used, certainly bring them. We don't need to put them in our policy. Does anybody disagree with that?
I agree with that.
Okay. Councilmember Martinez?
That's fine. I'm also okay with totally getting rid of the invocation, so.
Okay. Councilmember Barentine?
I don't think that's the policy discussion, so I would agree with the way you want to handle it.
Mayor Pro Tem Russell?
I think that this order of business has been in the policy manual forever, and I think it's fine.
All right, so then the general discussion, mayor's choice and council members' choice came up as something one of you or two of you wanted to talk about. Is there anything further on either of those tonight? Section 4, meetings, it's page 3 in the hard copy packet. It's page 6 of the electronic.
And it's probably page 10 in the paper packet, but that's the older one.
Okay, it sounds like there isn't anything that Councilmember Martinez?
I was going to say, if the two members who are not here brought that up, we'll probably have to revisit that part.
All right, so that brings up the question, which I was going to move to after we got at least one or two done. Do you want to continue doing this tonight? Do you want to wait until the other two are here? So weigh in quickly. Member Martinez.
I would like to continue moving forward, but maybe place mark the places who nobody has a comment on. Assuming that means that our two absent members would like to have a weigh-in on that.
Okay, Councilmember Cuesta.
I would expect to be treated the same way. I'm going to suggest that if I miss a meeting and things move forward without me, then they move forward without me, and that's the way it is. I don't expect to circle back, and I do suggest that we proceed forward.
Okay. Councilmember Barentine.
I would like to move forward, but like I said from the beginning of this, we have people's suggestions in here without their vetting it or their conversation for why they're trying to do it, which makes it somewhat difficult. So if we're going to allow it to be backtracked again, all we're going to do is open up the entire discussion and have it again. So I don't wish to revisit the whole thing and waste our time tonight if it is the intent of a majority of us to go ahead and just let it be redone again so that people who aren't here are participating.
Mayor Pro Tem Russell.
I actually agree. I would like to move forward with this. And when a council member is absent, the business of the city needs to go on. And we have been working on this since last January, and I want to get this done. And I felt like in the previous packet, I earmarked at page 15. So we had already covered a lot of this. So, and the purpose of this whole thing was to speed it up. It seems to me like it has slowed it down.
It very well might have. However, that is not what the city attorney heard, that we went that far, because she's given us what,
No, I am working very hard not to overstep your opinions. This is your document. However, to reassure you, I am taking notes on all the changes that you guys suggest, and in the next couple of days, I will send those changes all out to you once again so you can see what it is you've approved as a body, including the 2 members who aren't here.
Okay. Councilmember Martinez.
I would also like to move forward. We've been working on this forever, so let's continue progress.
All right, so on to the minutes of the meeting. Anything in there that is still problematic for anyone?
I'm sorry, I apologize. Where are you again?
We're in section 4, meetings, D, minutes of the meeting. City Attorney, when the person asked you to highlight that, did they say anything about it? Okay. So if the City Council, if the consents thereto, such statements shall be entered in the minutes and the cost shall be assessed against such City Council members' discretionary funds account. I remembered us actually saying that that was a superfluous statement and did not need to be in there at all. Am I remembering correctly? Yeah, that we didn't know why that was even there. So I think it needs to be struck. Anybody disagree?
And that's the last phrase, correct? I agree, that's
Is that on page 14?
page 11 of the, but I don't know, let me look at the new one.
Because I wrote down page numbers, so it makes it
Right.
difficult.
And then I think that's what it was, actually. I do. Councilmember Martinez.
I was going to say, I think the first part of that statement can stay. If the City Council consents thereto, such statement shall be entered into the minutes, period, and everything after that can be deleted.
That no costs will be assessed. Okay, I think that's what we agreed on that night.
Yes, I do.
Okay, on to H, consent agenda. So there's in highlight there, in some cities, items to be placed on each consent item are selected at a meeting of the city's department heads. In other cities, a special agenda committee chooses the consent time. Commonly, no debate is allowed on items included in the consent agenda. So I think this was more of some advice given, and do we want to change anything in this one based on that?
I would like to have
Councilmember Martinez?
I think what I recall us talking about is the mayor and the manager and the mayor pro tem talk about it inside, and where I feel like we left off on this one is if it was a budgeted item that was already budgeted under a certain dollar amount, it would be in the consent agenda. Or am I mixing two things?
Okay, Councilmember Bernstein?
I don't want in our policy any dollar amount or anything that would prohibit somebody from being able to represent on the consent agenda and pull anything, because that consent agenda is not done by this entire body. And so if somebody has a problem with it and they need to represent on that, then they need to be able to pull it, and no dollar amount should be put on there, no limitations on somebody's ability to represent their constituency. As far as in some cities, the suggestion piece of that, I would like to have that taken out, because I think it gives the impression that that's what we're going to do. And if I don't want suggestions in there, I want a policy in there.
Councilmember Martinez?
Oh, I was just going to say, then let's just leave it as it is, minus the highlighted text.
Great. Councilmember Cuesta?
Thank you. I agree. I hate to reference in some cities, what we're going to proceed. Where does the dollar amount come in here? I'm not sure if I'm following that.
I think I was
portion of
confusing
it.
two conversations that we had about that. So I think we talked about it as part of a different, the procurement policy and not part of this policy.
Understood. Thank you.
I do think that part of what happened maybe is Mayor Pro Tem and I have been talking with you all at a couple different points about when we decide to put some things on consent based on things we've decided before. So it might be that, but I don't think we want to put it in the policy. It's more of perhaps we've just agreed to do that, but there are times where Mayor Pro Tem and I decide to still put it on regular because we still think it needs to be talked about. So I think it'd be good for the future mayors and pro tems to have that flexibility and not have it written in policy. Mayor Pro Tem Russell.
I would like to strike the last sentence. In other cities, a special agenda committee chooses consent items. Commonly, no debate is allowed on items included in the consent agenda.
Right. That's what everybody's suggesting.
Okay.
So it'd actually be both of those sentences in some cities. Someone must have suggested that there are other ways to do it. I think what we're doing now works for us.
Okay.
We kind of know, and stuff gets pulled, it gets pulled. That's just the way it is. On to addressing city council. This is where we probably have the most that people brought up. So this is J, addressing city council. 1A, scheduled public comment. Should speakers be allowed to be placed on all public comment lists indefinitely? Councilmember Cuesta.
I raised that question. That was my comment. I just think there needs to be clarity. They can or they cannot. And I thought that the way the language existed, it did appear that somebody could just say, I want to be on every public speaking list in perpetuity going forward.
Thank you. Would Councilmember Martinez?
I would say no, they should only be allowed to do the next upcoming meeting.
Great, and I think I might have commented on this too. I think the language needs to be very clear that they can sign up within the week before by Wednesday at 5 p.m. or whatever time it is, but that it's the week before. Otherwise, we have people that are standing speakers all the time. That just really, it does not sit well with a lot of people. So I think that makes sense. 1B, unscheduled public comment, too vague, conflict with concluding meetings by 11 p.m. Oh, sorry, Councilmember Barentine.
The agenda doesn't come out till Thursday, and they're supposed to sign up to speak on an issue when they haven't even had the agenda come out. So I would like that we would at least give it another week potential in there if they, I don't know. It doesn't seem very fair on how they're supposed to be psychic to know what we're going to be talking about Monday when we don't get the packet until Thursday at 5 o'clock, and they're supposed to sign up at Wednesday at noon.
They don't have to sign up to talk about something that's on the agenda, though. I mean,
Well, we've had some of those discussions as well, and I'm sure that'll come up later or as a piece of this, but how are they supposed to know that they're going to want that time when they have to sign up to speak for the 5 minutes prior to knowing what we're going to be talking about?
well, they've been signing up for 5 minutes for the whole time I've been on council
That-
without
that-
ever seeing it, so
That
I'm
really
not sure what
doesn't
the
address
issue
the
is.
issue that I'm bringing up on how they're supposed to, if they have some issue that they wish to do an additional time with, they're not going to find out that we're talking about it until the next day,
Right.
even if they're diligent.
But if they don't sign up for that time, we will have already gone on to something else. So you're talking about giving them, we have to keep 2 weeks' notice for what our agenda items
Well,
are?
it's a bit of a dilemma that we have them prior to that. We want to encourage citizen input, but we're setting the agenda the day after we set their deadline to be able to speak. It doesn't seem to be encouraging them.
They're still allowed 3 minutes. There's no problem there, I
Oh,
don't think.
yeah.
Councilmember Cuesta?
And I disagree. I think that because, very dissimilar to other cities, we allow people to speak to anything they want to when they come up here. We do not hold them to that agenda. They can sign up however many days as they want in advance. I don't see the issue that we're limiting anybody. They can call anytime that week, speak about whatever they want. I think that we're actually one of the most allowing, which is what I think we should take pride in and continue to do so. So I don't have any trouble with that. Our folks can speak to whatever they want on any given night here.
As they should.
Thank you. So I think we scheduled public comment. Again, we agreed, no, we're not going to allow people to be placed on the list indefinitely. They will also have to do it a week ahead, and that we're going to make it clear. And then the unscheduled, that was what I was on to the next one, that's conflict with concluding meetings by 11 p.m. So I think what's happened, and I'm not sure who spoke to this, but that if we're going to allow for that amount of time, perhaps that's what it's, Mayor Pro Tem.
I think that we had discussed this topic, and where it says off agenda, does it say off agenda in the, that it was going to be changed, instead of off agenda, it was changed to unscheduled in the wording. That was the only thing that,
It has been changed to unscheduled public comment, but someone has still said that, I think what's happening here is that we want to end the meetings by 10. But we often allow an hour to an hour and a half for the public, so then we aren't able to do the other business. Would there be something we'd want to do? I think that's what this may be, but it might be, I'm wrong with that. Councilmember Barentine, and then
Well, it's to the same thing. It was one of the issues that I brought up about off-agenda versus unscheduled. We've interchanged the two within this policy that I think it makes it confusing. And there have been at times, in the time that I've been back on council, where people have tried to interpret that the people who are coming and speaking to council on off-agenda topics should be limited, and I think we've interchanged those two words, and it just keeps it confusing. So if we could go one way or the other, that would be awesome. If you take a look at number 3, when it said to bring any off-agenda matters during, that you would have to get the speaker's permission, my eyes are going blurry, or the chair's permission, the presiding officer, that's a off-agenda speaker shall be limited. I don't think it makes it clear to whether it's unscheduled or off-agenda, because then you have an off-agenda topic and farther down. So if we could be consistent in the way that we're...
I think we're dealing with two different documents here. For those of us that are looking on our online one, we're not looking at the older policy. These are the things that were raised. It's already been changed to scheduled public comment and unscheduled public comment. There's no on-agenda or off-agenda anymore in the language. Am I correct about that, City Attorney?
No, as a matter of fact, we changed the title, but we did not change the sentences underneath that. And I think what Councilmember Barentine is saying is read through the whole paragraph, and where it says off agenda, replace that word with unscheduled so it matches its title. And again, as you guys are speaking, I'm taking notes and making sure we get that stuff done.
Thank you for that
I'm
clarification.
talking about all of the sections under section J, which I think are all under the same addressing the city council. And so that was the issue I brought up. After reading through it again, I believe that we're interchanging unscheduled and off agenda at times that make it confusing.
Okay.
I would like to bring them the same.
Very helpful. Thank you. Councilmember Cuesta.
Thank you. I was the one who brought up conflict with concluding meetings by 11 p.m. That was my comment. And I do think that's, on some nights, something's going to have to give. If we have a lot of folks up here speaking, that we're going to have to let that go. I think that the folks speaking to us will always trump us getting out here by a certain time. And so that's why I think that 11 p.m. just might be compromised on some nights. We're going to have a lot of folks here to speak on certain subjects, and we're probably going to be here past 11. And so I thought that the 11 p.m. part is further down, but I do think it conflicts here.
So, Councilmember Cuesta, do you have an idea on how to make that less vague?
And to me, I think that we keep the unscheduled comment as it is, that we don't have any time limits there. If you sign up in advance, you get 5 minutes. If you sign up that night, you get 3. But I think that council itself is just going to have to stay later on some nights. I'm actually probably going to, I would prefer we strike the 11 p.m. When we get further down.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Russell.
Actually, those addressed everything. The off-agenda thing was confusing, and so.
So I think we've
Has that been
agreed
resolved?
then is that we will not be using agenda, off agenda, on agenda in any of the language in those 2 paragraphs. Is that correct? I think that's what everybody's agreed on. Councilmember Barentine, do you have something new on this?
I don't know, we seem to be jumping around, so I'm not sure. I'm getting some clarification that we've resolved the unscheduled and off agenda then.
We're not using any off-agenda language.
And then to the 11 o'clock thing, we need to keep the 11 o'clock so that there's some expectation from the citizens on how long they're going to have to stay up as
I'm going to
well.
interrupt you at this point. That's later. We're going to go
Oh,
to that
well,
the next time.
it had already been addressed, so if we could stop jumping around like that, maybe that would help.
If you follow the, that's fine. 4 is the manner of addressing council time limit. A is, can we make it clear that we want the address where they live so we know if they are a constituent or a stakeholder? I think this has been brought up because we have several landowners that some people think would like to know exactly that people know that they don't actually live in the city, but they're a stakeholder in the city. All remarks shall be addressed to the city council as a body, and no questions shall be asked. Are any of these problematic for any of you? Mayor Pro Tem Russell.
You know, one thing that I hadn't marked this before, but making it clear that we want the address where they live so we know they're a constituent. I know that the city of Littleton went to not asking people to give their address because it's problematic. things can happen, people target people. And so what the city of Littleton does, I believe, is when someone comes to address council, they tell their name and what district they live in.
Councilmember Martinez?
I'm actually comfortable with that as well, either saying what district they live in or what intersection they live by or own a property near.
Okay. Anyone else want to weigh in there? Councilmember Cuesta?
Meaning that there would be a choice D as well. I'm not a resident or business owner. They would specify district, intersection, whatever, or I just do not live in Inglewood, if I'm understanding correctly.
Sure. Maybe there's a way to do that with what we're going to give them when they come in. City Attorney, is there any problems with any of that? I sure like those ideas. I myself have heard people say they don't want to come because they don't want to say where they live, which is very sad.
I think there's a way to do that.
Okay, you can come up with some language for us. Thank you. I thought we all agreed all remarks shall be addressed to the City Council as a body. Is that still true for all of us? Anybody have trouble with that? Councilmember Barentine?
I would agree with changing the address piece, especially since we have gone to YouTube. It isn't just the city where people are able to get people's information, and so I think it would be better if we just had it, their district in that. I don't think it's just the world of technology. I don't think I've never heard a complaint from somebody or that they've felt threatened here, but now that we're Skyping it out to everywhere, it probably would be the better part of sense. So I would agree with that.
All right. Anything else under A through F? I think those all seem fairly acceptable. Councilmember Barentine? It's on what the city attorney gave us, so it's, I know we're trying to go between two documents, aren't we? Councilmember Barentine?
Addressing council, F4, subjective. I think that's where that was for the, is that the no speaker shall make threats of violence or harm or convey threats of violence or harm? Is it upon us to go ahead and put in everywhere that people should not violate the law? I mean, to threaten anybody is a violation of the law. So I think by kind of putting things in there like that, that we're eliminating it from other places, and I think that gets a little confusing. So I just don't know that we're going to try and put it in every single section that we expect people not to violate the law or to threaten or to harm or to create violence. I'm not sure how we're going to keep that consistent through this document.
As someone who has had to actually preside over the meetings and watching others where there have been threats, I think it's helpful to have something in there somewhere with addressing city council and the council at large. We have already had a number of people think that's a First Amendment right to do all kinds of things here that we may disagree on if we took a poll here tonight. So I think if we can agree that this is something we don't want to allow, that it gives some power to the presiding officer to say, hey, tone down a bit, and hopefully quell it. So I think having it in here in one place is not problematic. Mayor Pro Tem Russell.
On the E, no speaker shall use language not appropriate. We have inserted no swearing here from past council decision. How will we decide what is inappropriate? I'm assuming that is someone's comment. I actually, on that one, had a question. How will we determine the constitutionality? I mean, when you say in your opening statement before public comment that people will be expected to be respectful and things like that, but as far as limiting what they say, I think we can limit what we say as far as decorum, but limiting what they say, can we do that? I'm talking about 4E.
Well, we did have a decision that night. We had a point of decorum that was called, and we all decided, it was unanimous. Perhaps one person said, no, I'm not sure, but we all agreed that swearing was not something we wanted to entertain from the audience. What I would suggest here is that you all submit what words are swearing to or not, because I have to admit there are some things that I hear that I hear every day all the time from some people. So it's hard for me to react as quickly as someone might want if you think that someone swore. It's pretty obvious when the F word is thrown or I'm called names. That's different, but there's a few words that I hear throughout the day. Councilmember Barentine.
Well, we have to include all audience members to be everybody on YouTube. So I think this is a little bit hard to gauge, and it is just so subjective on who's listening to it. As you just said, being on a college campus, apparently your ears are a little bit more tolerant than maybe somebody else's. I don't know, but I think it's difficult for people to follow rules when they're that subjective and that vague, for them to understand where the parameters are and not just maybe who's speaking instead of what's being said, to the tolerance level of who's hearing it. I don't want it to be that subjective.
Here's what I would like, if I could suggest, if we could say we will encourage those who come forward to refrain from profane language that could be particularly offensive to different populations and a younger population, and leave it to the person up here to make a decision. Every 2 years it's going to change. There's going to be different ways in which we handle this. Is that too general, City Attorney? It gives the presiding officer something to go on.
I think that's fine. And in response to Mayor Pro Tem's concerns, this has been reviewed by the United States Supreme Court, and rules of decorum concerning profanity and respect for the rulings of the mayor are generally required. Remember, there's no constitutional right to open a public meeting up for public discussion. This city council does that, as Member Cuesta said, better than most cities, but they're not required to allow people to use this as a forum to offend so many people. It frightens people away. So that is allowed. However, if you'd like to step back from that as a body and use the language that the mayor suggested, I think it's a little easier to enforce.
That's what I would prefer.
I like what you said, by the way.
Okay, great.
I do too.
Could we end there for tonight? Call it quits? And we then have gotten to the end of page number 3 on the hard copy. I don't know what that is, 7. At the beginning, we'll start with public hearing. I have no idea what this one's about, so hopefully when the other 2 are back, we'll be able to finish those out and have a little bit more input.
It's page 15 on the paper copy.
Is it? Okay, great. So, Councilmember Cuesta, sorry.
We've got 2 more in section 4.
We do.
Be a nice even stop.
Okay, you're right.
If we made it through section 4.
I agree.
Can you get
All right,
more
public
minutes in there?
hearing. Okay, what in the world? Mayor Pro Tem Russell.
The only thing that I have underlined under public hearing is at the bottom. The standard time limit allotted to each speaker shall be 3 minutes, but the presiding officer, with approval of a majority of the city council, may modify the length of time to be allotted to all speakers heard upon any subject. And the only, I don't know how we could word this, but at a public hearing, we have developers coming and they're spending an hour of time, and then we have a constituent that may have spent a lot of time with preparing slides and everything. I think they ought to be given the amount of time that the developers have got. If it probably wouldn't have taken that long that night, but I believe someone who has done a professional presentation and has something to say should be given more time to speak up in favor of the public.
I have problems with that, because I think it favors really articulate, well-developed thinking, kind of writing people over those that don't, and I think it's unfair. I just think it should be the same, and sometimes we may let people go over 20 seconds or whatever. I just think it's really unfair.
Then I think we should give developers 3 minutes to present theirs.
I would be fine with that.
Okay?
Can I get a clarification on what you're saying? What you just said, no, you. When you said, I think it gives articulate people, a disadvantage to not articulate. Could you repeat that? Because I missed the point of that.
I think it's unfair to give people more time, who have time to sit down and figure it all out, and they have a huge, long thing, and someone else who didn't know that would even possibly be a possibility didn't have that time. It's unfair, I think, regardless. Just because someone spent a lot more time on something, I don't think should warrant them more time than somebody who didn't think they could maybe have 20 minutes and go on and on. Councilmember Cuesta.
Thank you. And refresh my memory, during a public hearing, a citizen would get 3 or 5 minutes when they're responding to, say, a developer. 3?
May I clarify?
Yes.
Yeah.
There are two different types of public hearing. The first kind is administrative, and that there is no petitioner. You can call an administrative public hearing anytime you as a body want to. For example, you've got an ordinance coming up. You approve it on the first reading, and then you ask that a public hearing be sent so that people will show up and speak about that ordinance. Everybody gets 3 minutes, or everybody gets 5 minutes. The other type of public hearing is quasi-judicial, and you actually have outlined most of how that happens in your community development code. So oftentimes the petitioner is a developer, but in your community development code, the petitioner has a right to present their case to the council. After the petitioner presents their case, then members of the public who would like to weigh in and speak may weigh in and speak, and they each get 3 minutes to present their issues or concerns. But you've already decided in your law that the petitioner is not treated as just a regular presenter. This is a person or a party that is presenting a case before the city council as basically the judicial board.
So it's a moot point because the quasi-judicial is already determined in the law.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So this others is just for administrative.
And I guess I'll pick up there.
Go ahead.
Thank you for the clarification on 3 or 5. And I agree with you that sometimes we've had a few developers come up here and they go on for quite some time. And I almost think it's because they haven't edited themselves enough. You know, I think some folks, they could have slimmed it down a bit and been a bit more to the point. We could maybe expand a citizen from 3 to 5. I would be willing to give citizens 2 more minutes in response to a PUD or something along those lines, if people were willing to hear that out.
Councilmember Barentine.
The public hearing piece of it that I think the city attorney is talking about is that it's already set out that the presenter is going to be the developer, and we've had developers come and give hour and a half long presentations. Maybe they should cut it down, be a little bit more succinct. And then we give citizens who may have prepared and understand the issue and know what they're talking about, and we're limiting them to 3 minutes. The 3 minutes that we limit the citizens to, we have control over that, of whether we increase that or not. That they're going to have the petitioner be the developer, but when you had somebody in this last public hearing who was very savvy about what was going on, has what they would like to do, a PowerPoint to make as well a presentation as what the developer has done, who's asking to change zoning in a community. Our purpose is not to try and see how we can cut people down, but try to get as much information to make as informed a decision as we possibly can. So I think that there ought to be a vehicle for people to go ahead and sign up ahead of time if they believe that they have something significant to say, and it should at least be 10 minutes. I mean, the presenters, the developers, not only get to come up here, but they get to come up and re-answer after everybody's spoken and answer questions again. So they get a rebuttal period for that. So it's not fair because some people are very well prepared and have time, and other people only have 3 minutes, and it's not fair because they didn't know they'd have the time. Well, then I'm grateful for the people that are well prepared and do that kind of work, because I'm trying to make an informed decision. So I don't know why we would want to cut somebody down in a public hearing situation where we're changing a law. We're doing something that's changing the situation that's going to affect other people, and we want to make sure that they're encouraged to speak, and I don't want to limit them to 3 minutes. I realize that we have to let the developer talk, especially when we're introducing the developer and calling them the expert. I mean, sometimes it gives the impression that we're already making a decision, so I want to encourage as many citizens to come up and give their opinion on something we're going to be passing a law and changing some situation for people.
Right, thank you. Councilmember Martinez, and then we're going to end the discussion.
I would be fine with increasing the time limit by 2 minutes. You can say a lot in 5 minutes and get your point across. So I would be fine extending it to 5 minutes, also knowing that that night we could also decide that we give folks more time if we want to.
All right, 5 minutes has been put out there. I feel like we should wait until the whole council's here. I'm fine with 5 as well. We probably could get all of us agreeing to 5 tonight, but I think we should have a more robust conversation because it will extend the meeting. It will be some time. If somebody wants 10 minutes and you want to be able to let people come up and do that, we need to have that conversation. So I think I'm going to end the conversation here. Sorry we didn't get through those two. Thank you. Next on our agenda is council members' choice. I have Councilmember Martinez, do you want to start?
Sure. I just want to say that I got the email from Museum of Outdoor Arts that they're extending their exhibit through September, and I'm really excited about that. So if you haven't had a chance to see it or would like to go see it again, please do.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Russell?
I actually have a couple comments on Council Requests 19039 and 19040 about the number of full-time positions that will not be filled in this budget year. I don't have anything about that. But the percentage of turnover from August 2018 to February 2019, the total turnover is 11%, voluntary turnover 81.4%, involuntary 18.6%. So in doing the math, because we just put out the information for the city manager that we currently have 400 benefited employees. I believe that is correct, right?
Excuse me. I think it's like 396, but 400 was a good estimate.
Okay, so I'm going to leave it at 400, so I worked backwards because I think these numbers, that means that approximately 50 people have terminated in the last 6 months. Wait, 8 and 6, 7 months. 50 people. 81.4%. So that means there were, hang on just a second, I'm going to go to the 18.6 involuntary. 9 people left. It was not voluntary. The voluntary people that left, that retired 17.1% was 7 people. Resignations was 34 people. I think that is incredibly high. Have we replaced any of these people?
Yes.
Okay, so, and I'll make this as a council request. Can we get the number of those positions that have been replaced? And also, my other question is on the people that have left voluntarily and involuntarily, how many of them signed non-disclosure agreements with the city?
Is that it, Mayor Pro Tem?
I believe so.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Valentine? Or I was going to just keep going. You want to go? Go ahead.
You bet. Thank you to staff for providing information regarding the variance for Barnhouse Tap and just further information on food trucks. It seemed like when the gentleman came, I guess it was just last Monday, and spoke with us, the request was twofold. And one was regarding the variance, which is addressed here in the council request and what they would need to do to go through that process. And the second one was more the application, and that might be too cumbersome at this point in time, that there's a 2-week gap, I believe they said, from the time you apply to the time that a food truck would actually get approval, meaning that they can't just hit these guys up on a Friday for a Sunday event they might be having or something along those lines. So while the information we got back did request the variance, I'm not sure that it really addressed the application, if there's a way that we could streamline that. There was also something that somewhat stood out to me, and that was that food trucks operating on private property would need to go through that application process, whereas if they're on the public right-of-way, they're not regulated by the zoning code. Meaning, if I'm understanding Barhouse correctly, if they park on Broadway, they're all set, a food truck that is, and would not need a permit, whereas if they're putting it in back, more accommodating to their business and their patrons, which I think is what it was built for, then we make these guys jump through the hoop. And even that seems a little bit lopsided to me, that it really comes down to a matter of parking, and where you could potentially even obstruct traffic, I would think, parking on Broadway, That is at least how I'm reading this, that they would not need that permit out front of the building, but they would need it out back where it makes more sense.
I wouldn't argue with any of that. I mean, the information that was provided quickly is not complete. I'm working with staff in the finance department and licensing, particularly finding out what other cities are doing, what we can do to streamline the procedure and offer more information. So I will keep that council request open and call it only moderately answered and follow up appropriately.
Thank you. We're reaching patio season, and I feel like people are going to be rushing out of their houses pretty soon here to enjoy places like that we have in Inglewood. The second one is I've had a couple citizens reach out to me regarding the app and just the general functionality of it. I've used it once, and I was able to make it through. But I've had a few people say to me recently that they thought that the app was almost entirely self-contained, that they could report something that would go to the department, and that would close it out, or they'd get some sort of response directly from a department. Whereas I'm hearing reports sometimes that something is submitted through the app, then it says, well, you need to call the department, where folks weren't thinking there's that second step of contact needed. Is this something that you've had any reports on, or is it something that the city is aware of?
Yes, and citizens have asked about it and talked to me about it. We've frankly assigned a staff person to take this on as a project in the next 2 weeks and look at how all the departments are responding, how we're using the app. I think technically it works just fine, but we want to make sure that we're following the policy, which means we do respond to the citizen or the resident who's asking the question with appropriate comments and not direct them to make another call.
Great. I think it's
I'll report
an
back on
excellent
that.
tool. When functional, that it works well. And so I'm glad that somebody's assigned to that. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Barentine.
Just to add to Councilmember Cuesta's right-of-way issue with the food trucks. I think there's a concern when I went downtown and talked to them because they were required to have them on Broadway. It takes up their parking. But there's also a danger aspect to that because especially if it's in front of the Bob, you're blocking off part of that crosswalk piece of it. It makes it a little bit more dangerous. When they had the truck in back of Barnhouse Tap, it's a place that was designed for it. It was in the design that they submitted. That was part of what they had a problem with, is that they designed it, they told them this is what I've designed it for, they built it, they paid for it, and then somebody comes and goes, hey, by the way, that's not zoned. That doesn't seem like a good work process for us, is to get a plan, approve it, have them build it, do the expense, and then go out and say, hey, by the way, can't. That doesn't seem wise. So I think that we just need to relook at the issue of the trucks as well as the private property. But when they had the second one and they were able to put it out on Broadway, it's dangerous, especially farther down. At least downtown, you're having people go 25 miles an hour. I mean, the speed limit over there is what, 35? So it's already kind of sketchy. So I would actually encourage us to have the conversation about safer and get some more uses out of it. I sent everybody a copy of my council request already on Friday. I was very disappointed when I got the request for the Sierra 19047. I requested a copy of the emergency operation plan. I've been told over and over again that it doesn't exist. I've been told, people have shown me their core request where they've been told it doesn't exist. And in this document by Margaret Brocklander, which I don't know why she's on here when we do have two designated employees that have said that the co-emergency managers employees designated to do this, that not only do we have a plan that's a draft plan from 2015, and that prior to that we still had in place the emergency operation guidelines, along with the information that I found out from Arapahoe County that we're part of. We got a grant and we're given $87,000 to go ahead and get this done, and it's all lined out in the grant that I got on how this was supposed to be taken care of, and I assume that we got the money and we got employees and we paid them, and I am still almost going on close to a year after the flood and somebody passing away. Publicly, we're telling people that we don't have a plan, that we don't have somebody in place to take care of anything still, not only for the city, but not for this building, and not following our laws. So I requested a copy of the emergency operation plan. I received a lot of stuff except for the emergency operation plan. I outlined it in my council request, which I copied council on, that I want the plan. And since I know now that it exists, I want the emergency operation plan, even if it's in draft form, which I am confused by. And I think I also pointed out in some of the bullet points, which I won't go over all of them, that I also wanted the documents that show the conclusion of the grant and how we spent the $87,000 that was supposed to secure us an emergency operations plan that wasn't a draft. So if we could, I really think that that's what plays into people being frustrated, is that it seems to be that the information flows only after people know that you know it exists. And I already knew it existed, and all of a sudden it popped up. And I have been asking for this, and citizens have been asking for it, and it's just very frustrating for people. So if we could just get all of the information out and celebrate what we do good, figure out what we didn't do right, and start moving forward instead of to the public making it look like we're hiding things, I think we'll all be a lot better off. Was there any question on the email that I sent?
What I would say is that not all of the documentation is available. Finding a copy of the draft plan is problematic, and we're working on the extra information about the grant. It is not readily available in the files that we've looked at, and we're continuing to search it. We're not hiding anything, we just don't know where it is.
I would find it difficult that we would write up a grant to the extent that we wrote up, and that we didn't, since we had a very detailed plan on how we were going to implement it, that I would be very disappointed if we had no follow-up whatsoever on spending $87,000 of the Fed's money.
Councilmember Barrington, I'm going to ask that you take her answer at that, and they're continuing to look. I know this has been a constant one. You emailed all of us. We've also all agreed, I think the majority consensus agreed, that we would give time in order for them to give us all the documents in another week, I believe, or 2 weeks. Is it 2 weeks?
On April 8th.
April 8th is when
Scheduled a full presentation.
For clarification, I don't need any additional information on the grant. I believe you've given everything on the grant portion of it and what was expected and what was agreed to for the $87,000 and the additional people that were hired in order to perform those jobs. I guess what you're asking for additional time is to show that the grant was ever completed, or that we actually used the money to the extent that we said we were going to.
Find those correct documents.
Okay, but you are able to go ahead and provide me with the copy, the draft copy.
The draft copy of the 2015 plan?
Correct.
I'm not sure. That's perfectly honest.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Anything else, Councilmember?
Just want to make it very clear that in this document, she says that that's exactly what the task force is reviewing. So they must have it. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to review it. So whatever it is she's referring to and the 2010 guidelines that they say exist, I would like to have those.
All right, thank you. I do want to make a comment. I'm going to be out for the next several days. I'll be available by phone, but I am going to be out of the country, and I also could take email. I do want to instruct us to follow the agreements on how we email one another. There's been far too much emailing of all of us this week, and I sometimes get pulled in with just 2 people. Let's make sure that all of our communication goes either directly to the city manager and then ask her to send it out to all of us, or to the city attorney if it's in that purview, and send it out to us. Is that correct? That would be the correct way to do that.
Communication should come to administrative staff. Yes.
Thank you. So please refrain from sending everything to all of us all the time so that there's no mistakes made. There have been a number of citizens that have asked me, what is going on here? So that is all that I have tonight. City manager?
No report tonight.
City attorney?
I'm going to be attending a criminal justice conference this week, and so I'll be forwarding and talking to Dugan about anything that might come up.
Great, thank you. This meeting is adjourned.